So, Tim, I said, that's not a hole in one. That's a hole in none. Right?
Do you not get it? Do you not get it?
I don't know. Yeah.
It wasn't a hole in one. It was a hole in none.
Whoa.
Tim loves
What
it.
a joke.
Tim
What a
loves it.
joke.
That's the face of someone who loves the joke.
He loves it.
The
Hi,
known
everyone.
joke enjoyer.
Welcome to Red Planet. Can we get a round of applause for making it? If you have a clap emote, great. In the chat. Here, if you're listening, you can just start clapping spontaneously. It's okay, especially if you're in public. Go ahead, do
Definitely you're in
do it.
public. If you're on the
Someone
bus.
asks, hey, why are you doing that? Be like, well, let me tell you about this great show called Red Planet. And there's your really natural segue.
And also, if you're in like New York or London, no one will ask you that. So that's fine.
Yeah, they'll just keep walking. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us today. Another wonderful episode of Red Planet. Sophie is unable to make it today, but don't worry. The rest of the team will guide you smoothly and safely throughout this entire episode.
I'm sure we will. And we have Tim here to keep me and Kira in check. We will not be allowed the reckless abandon
That's right.
that we normally have. On
When left
it's not just me and Mule just fighting for our lives.
Yeah.
Fight or flight ADHD moment.
Speaking of fighting for our lives, Tim, what was the most base thing you did this week?
I don't know. I was thinking about that before the stream. I wasn't even sure that I was gonna make it for this stream because of all the cyclones and floods and all that kind of stuff. There was another flood. Well, there was another big storm scheduled for today. It was supposed to start last night, but it's kind of just like it rained a bit overnight and now it's fine. But apparently this afternoon there's going to be like thunder or whatever. So it's been like downgraded.
Oh, wow.
So, so feeling fine now, but it is like, it's weird, you know, like after something like that, every time when you're like coming home or whatever, and you see like really gray clouds, you're just like, oh shit, no. I need to go home and I need to do this and I need to do that.
If y'all don't know, Tim lives in New Zealand and for the past few weeks has been like, just pummeled by like a cyclone and then like what else?
Like earthquakes, it was floods, it was like just like everything. And
everything. So we're very glad he's alive and here.
Aside from just surviving the climate apocalypse, I didn't think of too much because I've been pretty busy. But I just spoke to a group that are doing like a big kind of strike thing at the moment. I can't say too much about it just yet, but spoke to them about donating some of my time to do like some kind of like like graphics and stuff for them for all their stuff. So that's probably the most based thing aside from just like not getting swept away in a flood. What about you, Mule? What's the most base thing you did this week?
So, definitely not as heroic as Tim. Genuinely, very worried.
No one can ever be. Don't worry about it.
It's true. This is why he's got gauntlets and a sword, because he is literally a hero.
A Highlander.
A Highlander. He is. There can be only one, and it's him.
Is it Valerian steel though?
No,
is it even Valerian steel?
What's that? Is that from the movie Highlander?
That's a fake Game of Thrones. I think it's supposed to be like.
Wait, is that actually fake? I thought that was real. I thought that was like the folded steel.
I know. I think it's supposed to be like Damascus steel, which is like an actual thing, but because Damascus is a place in our world and not in their world.
This
is just like when I was playing Minecraft on stream, and my chat were like, "But Mule, obsidian is real," and I was like, "What?" And it is.
But
and
it's
then,
not
and
like
then,
the stuff in Minecraft.
And then they told me, they
you
were
have
like,
some obsidian.
And then
What's wrong with you?
Like,
that rocks.
What kind of show is this? What am I doing here with these losers? Obsidian swords, Minecraft.
this isn't a sword. This is just like a little thingy, but it's
I know, but
it's
that's in
yeah.
addition to your sword, is what I'm saying.
It's when like super hot lava hits water and it cools rapidly and forms glass. But it's like it's super precious into a lot of cultures, like a lot of South American cultures, and then for Maori as well, it was super rare. So yeah, like you see like really rare, like old like like tools and implements and stuff made out of obsidian, because it's like quite hard and quite good for stuff like that. But it's yeah, super precious. But yeah, anyway, sorry, you were playing Minecraft.
Yeah, and then my chat were like, but Mule, netherite is also real. And then I believed him for a little minute, and that was embarrassing. Anyway, back to the most base thing that I did this week. So, I work for a little organization called Great Manchester Tenants Union. Most people have never even heard of me doing that. It's not something I mention every episode. But we actually did. Wait, what position do you hold in that organization? I am an elected member solidarity representative officer.
This is the first time hearing this. That's fantastic.
Wait, really?
No, I'm joking.
I was gonna say, what the hell?
That was a joke going off of your
I don't know anything. I don't know what I've said.
I don't mean to interrupt you. Please keep going.
When I've said
so sorry.
it.
And I'm sorry for all our listeners. I'm currently putting bread in my face. So I really should probably not just blurt out in the middle of Mule's like talking. I interrupt him while I have bread in my face hole. It's extremely not ladylike. And I'm sorry, Mule. I will scoot away so I don't get tempted.
We forgive you, Kira. Don't worry. So yeah, basically, with Great Manchester Tenants Union this week, I went to one of our branches that is like in one of the more deprived areas of Manchester, known as Middleton, and we did a training session there, basically to teach people how to handle their own disputes, because that's kind of how we work with GMTU. We operate under the collective dispute model. So even if someone is like really having like the worst time ever, we do try and encourage them to take control of their own dispute, because it can be very empowering. Like, it can be hard for people most of the time because they come across this bureaucratic process when taking on letting agents and landlords and stuff, like, oh yeah, just file a complaint and we'll deal with it. But then as soon as we come along and say, actually no, forget all that, just write a letter to the fucking CEO and we'll co-sign it with you. So all you have to do is write a draft, basically, and then we'll co-sign it. If they don't act within 7 days, then it's fucking protest time, right?
I feel like this is one of the I'm interrupting you again, of course. I feel like this is one of the undiscussed benefits of abolishing the police.
Right.
Because the police are horrible fascists, like protector of oppression, to perpetuate oppression. All that stuff, right? But what I don't think people really discuss very often is how they also serve as a tool for alienating us from each other when it comes to conflict resolution. You just call a cop. You see your literal next door neighbor is making too much noise. You call a cop to drive across town to knock on their door and say, turn down your music. Like
that was something that was quite a lot in that Brick by Brick, the book that the Cradle community made, that we had just a couple guests like a month ago maybe, or whatever. There was a lot in their book that spoke specifically about the outsourcing of like if you have like some kind of social problem or whatever like that, it's like, and like these days it's like you're encouraged to outsource the resolution of that problem, so yeah, like you're saying, like a noisy neighbor or whatever like that, you call the police, they handle it for you, so you don't actually have to go out, you don't have to go see your neighbor, you don't have to you don't actually, you live in a little box and you don't talk to anyone else.
Yeah, and that's so true. Like, it's a really good point that you bring up there, Kira, because like, we at GMTU are always like, if you have an issue with your neighbor, it's not really our job to like try and evict that neighbor. We would never evict anyone. The job that we would take position of in terms of what we could possibly do, the extent of what we would do as an organization in that scenario would be to like tell the landlord that the landlord kind of needs to mediate between the two tenants and try and enter into a conflict resolution scenario. Other than that, we don't get involved because we know that that can lead to evictions, and we're just not about evictions, really. Do you know what I mean? Doesn't matter who it is. So yeah, with that, it can be quite difficult. Luckily, we don't have stuff like that often, and 9 times out of 10, 90% of the problems that our tenants have are from landlords or social housing. So yeah, we educated a bunch of folks in Middleton on that on Tuesday. That was really good. It was a really good positive session. We actually came across a guy from Rochdale who came to that session, an elderly black man who is a migrant from Nigeria originally, and he has been without gas, heating, all that kind of stuff in his social housing apartment for 8 years.
What?
Yeah, 8 years. And he's like, he obviously, like, he's straight away, he's like, I know it's racist. I know it is. I know it's racism. This is the same. If you will have heard of this in the UK, there was unfortunately like a young child, a young black kid died. He was like 4 years old. He died because he had mold and stuff all in his lung. The coroner's report basically said it was the landlord's responsibility, the social housing association's responsibility. That kid's name was Awabi Shark, and the social housing provider is Rochdale Borough-wide Housing. That's, funnily enough, the same social housing provider that our member is with, that's left him without gas and stuff for 8 years. And he's also noticed that there is just like a systemic amount of racism involved in that housing association. So it's very fucked up. It's something we're definitely looking forward to helping him with, because Rochdale Borough-wide Housing need to be dismantled and built again from the ground up.
Yeah, jeez, yeah.
So so that was a really good session. And then we also went to we supported another of our members who's a student member with a letting agent that they're involved with. Really fucked up shit. Like, they just let these students live in like rat infestations, silverfish infestations, they like, places with damp, carbon monoxide leaks, all this kind of shit. It's really bad. And obviously because they're students, they absolutely don't feel empowered to do anything. And especially if you're like a woman, or if you're racialized or queer, you're not gonna try and challenge the establishment, right? And our young member, who was like extremely brave in going in there, even with her like parents, like she was in tears like the whole time. Do you know what I mean? Which sort of shows how important it is to have comrades go with you and handle these things yourself. Like, she just simply would not have been able to handle that on her own. And that's what these disgusting, parasitic, fucking profit incentivized bastards rely upon, right? They rely upon that shit. And they know this. They know about the implicated power structures in society, cis heteronormative patriarchy, white supremacy, all these different power structures that exist in order to enable people to be, I guess the way that I would word it is, ignorant through bureaucracy, right? Because 9 times out of 10, these people are just like, yeah, send an email. Or like, yeah, go through the official channel. Do this, fill out this form, etc., etc. And that enables them to sort of be like, oh, well, I don't actually give a fuck about this person because, I'm a cishet white guy or something like that, right? So anyway, that was the most base thing we did this week. We had like a group of students outside this letting agent, and we were telling everybody who was going into the place, yo, have you got problems with the landlords here? And they were like, yeah, they're shit. And we like recruited about 10 new members. It was really fucking funny. They were all saying the same shit as well.
Everyone hates landlords.
They were all saying the same shit. They were like, yeah, there's loads of rats and mice, and like they just like say that it's dealt with. They have like a student app portal or something that they log things through.
Oh, right.
And
landlords and portals.
Right. It's fucking fucked. So fucked. So we did get some progress there, and like the one of the high up like general managers agreed to meet with our member to just see. All she wants is to be unwound from the contract. And I know I'm going on a little bit with like the base stuff that I've done here, but I just want to wrap this up real quick because I think this is really important for people in the UK to know, and maybe people in other countries to investigate if they see if there is legislation like this there. So if you enter into any kind of consumer contract, and that includes tenancy agreements, right? you have 90 days to unwind from that contract if that has been sold on false pretenses.
Yeah.
Right?
Like sometimes they call it like a cool down period or something like that. Is that it?
Yeah, literally that. Sometimes it's mentioned in the agreement, sometimes it's not. I wonder why. You know,
Wow.
and so that's something that's really important to know.
But even if it's not mentioned, it's still a thing.
It's still legit. It's still legit. Yeah, this is like legislation that goes.
I didn't
above.
know that.
What a lot of people don't realize is that these tenancy agreements that landlords and letting agents just kind of cook up out of nowhere, they're just that. They're quote unquote businessmen's agreements. Like that. That's all it is.
Yeah, absolutely. The law will always supersede any kind of thing that in a contract that someone brings up like that, whether it's a landlord or like the other week when I was talking about the stripper strike that's happening down here, how the contract that they have says, okay, you guys are contractors as opposed to employees, but the law actually says if you fit this criteria, you're an employee or whatever. So it doesn't matter what it says in the contract between two individuals. If the law kind of says something else, that'll always override that.
I wonder how that applies. I wonder how that applies in America, because I know in America, it's a state by state thing, when it comes to landlord tenant laws. Like there's some states that are really good for quote unquote, very good for landlord tenant, very good for tenants, and other states very good for landlords. Yeah. It's always gonna be bad for tenants, to be clear. Like that's just the reality of the shit of landlords. But that I wonder how that works in America.
I'm constantly. This is why I asked Legal Kimchi. Do you remember on your charity stream? Kira was doing a charity stream. Yeah, and
we raised $27,000.
It was really good. It was really based. Yeah, it was so good, and we had so many awesome guests on there. And one of them was Legal Kimchi, like an actual lawyer, who's on YouTube, and you should definitely go check his stuff out because he's really cool. But I asked him. I was like, "Do you know anyone who knows about like housing law in the States at a federal level? Because federal law overrides state law a lot of the time, right? So if you actually like." I don't know exactly how it works, but I know that like that would be something that would be of interest to people in the US in terms of housing rights. So it would be cool. I almost feel
like the federal state law division works, if not intentionally. I don't know if it's an intentional thing, but I think it works to just confuse like the people, because whenever I feel like I have some like protection, it's like, no, there's another law on some other level that like negates it. Or like when it comes to, you'll see how like federal law does not supersede state law when it comes to marijuana possession, but it can, like it should, like it theoretically, the feds can come into any state that is like allowing for marijuana distribution and like shut it all down and arrest every single person. But they just don't, because they're just like, because they just don't. Just because they just don't. And so like it gets very confusing because you're like, what is happening? What is happening here?
It's extremely fucked. And I think
for the record, I don't want the feds to do that. I don't think
no, of course, I just want to make it clear
that that's not good.
But moving on from me, Kira, what is the most base thing that you did this week? Oh my gosh, that's right, you sweet, beautiful Kira.
Well, I didn't really do that much this week. Honestly, the most basic thing I did was like self-care stuff. So I've been getting back into working out, working on my butt, because I do a lot of butt workouts. Chatters from my own community, chatters know this. Been trying to eat more and like eat not completely just random any edible thing I can find in my apartment at like 10:30 at night before I go to sleep, to try to make up for all the calories I forgot to eat because of ADHD. I'm trying to actually like have breakfast and do stuff like that. And also trying to sleep. And also I took yesterday off from streaming because I was just like, I was really tired. But I was also really need to organize my place because it was really stressing me out. And I have, and so I made a lot of good progress, and I'm really proud of myself, and I already feel like a little bit more like a put together person. So, I'm sure there's something else base I did, but I can't think of anything. Oh, I bullied my own community a lot over the past few days. So that was pretty based. They deserve it. They deserve it.
Oh, anyways, that's really good. I'm really proud of you. That fucking rocks. And it is hard. like I know you've got ADHD, it is hard to like get a meal plan together, like when you're working out. Like that's one of the hardest things, not just to like figure out, but also to stick to.
Just
You
that
know,
the time and energy when it like, because I mean, like, listen, there are people that have far more obligations than I do, but for me, my obligations are a lot for me to handle. Like being a Twitch streamer, and trying to run a community all the time, and then also being a sex worker on the side. Not on the side. It's like half. Like it's like they're just both taking up like a lot of time. And like a lot of the process of being like a content creator is just like in thinking about stuff too. And that's,
my God, yeah.
It's just, and then always feeling inadequate because you're not doing it. Like that's a whole other thing.
Like you can never turn it off, right?
Right,
I don't know.
right.
I don't know if you do this, either of you.
Oh, I deleted
like...
Twitter off my phone. That's based.
Oh yes, well done. That's so based. I haven't been on Twitter.
Really
I haven't been on
hard
Twitter in a
to stick
week.
to it. So if you see me on Twitter less, it's because I only use Twitter when I'm sitting on my desktop, like at the computer. I'm trying to use it less. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I don't know if either of you two do this, or if any other content creators watching do this, but like sometimes like imagining the thing that you're going to talk about on stream later that day, and then imagining what people are going to say about that, and then having imaginary conversations about that and arguments that actually will never happen.
Oh yeah.
Like they're never going to happen. And you're like desperately
and you completely forget to even do it on.
Yeah, you don't even say the thing. You don't even do that thing.
Like has a whole life cycle in your brain, and you have all the stresses and all the like potentials, and then you turn on your stream and you have ADHD, so you don't remember to say anything.
Yeah, and I get like huge heart palpitations about this shit. I'm there like shitting, pissing, vomiting before stream. I'm thinking like, what if someone brings this up? I don't want to talk about it. Yeah, literally coming literally crying.
Over I understand.
Oh,
it's
so hard.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Good to know I'm not alone.
Yeah. Well, with that, should we get in some news?
I don't know. I want to talk about coming more, but no, you're right. We should. And it's my turn to read the news first.
It is. I would rather, at this very point in time, hear you explain a little bit more about what's happening over in Turkey and Syria.
Thanks, Tim. I will do that for you and everybody listening at home. So yeah, we are well aware. I think we reported on this not last week, but the week before, about the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Really, really, really intense. This is sort of like unheard of level magnitudes of earthquake. I don't really know what the measurements are in particular, but it says here magnitude 5.3 earthquake jolts Turkey's central Niğde province. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but the earthquake had a depth of 7 kilometers and hit the Bor district on Saturday afternoon. Now, just to be clear, this is another earthquake on top of the previous earthquakes that have happened, and you know this is you know, extremely upsetting, and another earthquake as well also happened. So nearly 200 people again arrested for alleged poor construction. This is something I talked about last time we talked about this. You know, this is in Turkey, specifically like Erdogan's government, and I sort of had a little bit of you know, questions, a couple of questions to ask about this. And no one's really enlightened me on this yet, and I haven't had the time to sort of research this. But like, you know, is this kind of like, you know, it just doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? If there's something I'm not understanding about that, about where it's like, yeah, it doesn't really feel right to sort of hold people responsible for earthquakes that you know have never been predicted before. Like, imagine if next week there was like a tsunami in Britain, and Rishi Sunak was like, okay, you lot didn't make your fucking houses tsunami proof, so time to go to jail. Like, you know, it kind of feels like that. You know what I mean?
For what you're saying, it sounds like, because I'm not, I don't really know personally, I don't feel like I'm wise enough to understand like how to approach this, you know, but from what you're describing, it sounds like it's like a government that tries to individualize the repercussions of global warming, right?
Well, so I think like the thing
I don't know if the earthquake has anything to do with global warming. I'm not really sure if there's a connection there. But if it's unprecedented and now it's happening all of a sudden,
I think so the thing with
I don't know,
with the arrests and stuff, the deal is a lot of the buildings that have fallen down, and the way that they've fallen down, like the pancaking when they fall down like that, speaks to flaws in their construction, and because of there's been a whole bunch of other earthquakes in the past in Turkey, and every time they're like, okay, cool, we're changing the way our building codes, basically, like increasing their standards for like how you construct a building or whatever. And then so a bunch of these ones that have fallen down and like killed huge amounts of people and stuff, they don't fit these building standards, but were constructed after they were implemented. So the people that they are arresting are like the architects, the builders, the developers that worked on these sites, and basically like designed and built these buildings saying that they conformed to the standards, but obviously people weren't inspecting them to make sure that they were, or something else more dodgy was going on. But this is also a huge thing. We've had this in New Zealand as well, with just kind of like huge developers that making huge subdivisions, because we're in the middle of a housing crisis. I don't know, Turkey's probably the same. They're just trying to get as many houses out as possible, and then there's also like the speculative market, like people just willing to buy them. So there's a lot of money in building these kind of like these gigantic projects of apartment buildings, subdivisions, all these kind of things like that. So it's kind of like, this is like why would people be incentivized to do that? Oh, maybe because there's a greater economic system that kind of
that makes much more sense.
So so it's this thing where it's like, the government punishing these people for skirting around regulations, but it's kind of like, okay, well, like
too little too late, right?
It's like, okay, well, maybe you should have been more serious about enforcing them, maybe all this kind of stuff, because it's it's the same in most places. To meet the inspectors have to go to check the that the buildings pass the thing. So it's like, it kind of speaks to a much larger scandal than just like a couple of builders or whatever that built the problems, whatever. This is like the whole kind of like like this industry of like construction and developing and all this kind of stuff. So who knows how much of a bigger picture thing they'll actually go for. It might be like you say, where they just go like, okay, well, some of these builders, like, they did a shitty job or whatever. But what they really need to be looking at is being like, okay, well, why why would people be trying to build these houses under regulation, all that kind of stuff.
I want to correct myself, because I was 100% wrong about, and maybe Mule and I were both wrong about, if I understand you correctly, Mule, about how like unprecedented earthquakes are in this area. Apparently this area sits on like a fault line, like a big strike fault, and it's pretty seismically active, and that seismologists have been predicting like a really big earthquake in this area for decades. So and by the way, this is when I lived in Seattle, this was like a thing that I heard about all the time. Like, we don't have earthquakes really, but we're like, there's gonna be one day, and we're all gonna die. So we just like, all the buildings have to be constructed for that. But so I guess they should have been building in preparation for that.
There's also one other like really kind of like ridiculous thing that it's so the Turkish government I only found out about this the other day, for a long time now have been doing, because they know that there was a lot of buildings that weren't up to code, but they were gigantic, a lot of people lived in them, all this kind of stuff. So they've been doing construction amnesties, where they were basically like, look, if your building isn't up to code, just like, come forward, pay the fee, and then you'll get an amnesty on like your building not being up to code, which is just like really
like a carbon tax or something.
Exactly. Which is wild, because it's like so like there are a lot of buildings that have been built under code or without even permits at all, but also kind of like like we're now, I guess, fulfilling a social function that they felt they couldn't just like kick everyone out or whatever, which is like kind of like a tricky spot sort of thing. But yeah, obviously this wasn't the way to handle it. And
it makes a lot more sense to
I
was thinking. Like my initial thought was kind of like, as I said, a sort of reactionary response to something unprecedented. But if it has been predicted, and if they are just sort of like trying to cover their ass by, like you say, not actually having proper building regulation and inspection, and it's one of those, folks, capitalism and just letting incentivizing people to build these developments for profit alone rather than actual safety and actually making sustainable habitations for people. Of course, stuff like this is going to happen, right? Of course.
Here at Red Planet, when we're wrong, Tim swoops in and corrects us. And
that is what happens 90% of the time.
We're willing to admit when we're wrong, and we advise all of our listeners to do better in this regard. Be more like us.
We've heard
admit when you're wrong.
We've seen you. You are valid. But
right.
So moving along.
It is Kara.
Oh my God, it is my turn.
Next.
Oh my goodness gracious. Okay. So, chat. Federal Senator Lydia Thorpe halts Sydney's Mardi Gras parade, protesting the police. So, former Green Senator Lydia Thorpe was removed from Sydney's gay and lesbian Mardi Gras parade overnight after lying on the ground in front of a float. And so Senator Thorpe laid down in front of this float during the Pride Parade, and or the gay and lesbian Mardi Gras parade, and was yelling "fuck the police."
So based.
And so the whole parade had to stop. So Senator Thorpe was escorted by officers and not arrested. So awesome. The police say that she was removed by parade organizers for breaching the terms of her participation. That morning, this morning, Senator Thorpe posted that she joined the Pride and Protest float. She joined the Pride and Protest floats to protest against police violence. In quote, Black and brown trans women started the first Pride March as a protest against police violence, she posted. Today, we still face violence from police. Proud to have joined the Pride and Protest float in Sydney to say no pride in genocide, no pride in prisons, and no cops in Pride.
Oh,
Based.
So based. Based.
So let's see here. Oh yeah, so there's a little bit more about Lydia Thorpe. She's a former Green senator, now standing independently for Victoria, an Indigenous Australian woman of Gunai. Okay, I don't know if I can pronounce these words. Can any of you pronounce these? I don't want to butcher.
So Gunai, Gunditjmara, and Jamboring.
Okay,
so
thank
those
you.
are the three kind of groups that she has heritage with.
Awesome. And she's the first Indigenous senator in Victoria, is well known for her vocal criticism of Australian political institutions that she believes are illegitimate products of colonialism and genocide. Extraordinarily based. Extraordinarily based.
She does seem like she is one of the good ones. She's so she's the senator in Victoria, which is like where Melbourne is. It's generally a more kind of like progressive area, but it's interesting as well because she's the former Greens senator, so she's independent now because she was actually forced to resign from the Greens because she has a close friendship with her former partner who is an ex-head of a motorcycle gang over there, the Rebels, who are like huge or whatever, and it was like a huge scandal at the time, and they were like, now you're unfit to stand as like a Greens MP because of your relationship with this bikie gang. There's a lot of like in Australia, there's like the bikie gangs are like the biggest boogeyman they've got basically. But I think it also like one thing that a lot of people outside of like Indigenous communities, both in Australia and over here in Aotearoa, don't understand that like like a lot of the time like it's like there is a significant connection between Indigenous groups and a lot of like what people would consider like outlaw groups or whatever like that, especially with a lot of the groups being formed as like a kind of means of like community protection and community groups. And even though like a lot of them have kind of like like gone into more like what we're gonna say like more I guess moved away from community defense into other industries or whatever like that, the connections are still there, so and we've seen that a lot down here, both in Australia and in New Zealand, with a response to crises in rural areas where you get like like biker gangs setting up mutual aid networks and all that kind of stuff. Like we saw that through COVID, through recent cyclones and all that kind of stuff. So so a lot of people were like, I think she knew that she wasn't supposed to be, like a sitting member, like a senator, and having close friendships with people that were actively being investigated by the state and stuff. But yeah, I think it's important for people to not look at that and just be like, oh, okay, she's an indigenous woman that is like friends with bikie gangs, like she's obviously like a bad person or anything like that, because I think there's a lot more nuance to it in indigenous communities. But anyway, I heard that you were. Oh yeah, was there more?
No. I wanted to hear if there is news that you wanted to tell me about, Tim.
yeah. I was gonna say, I heard that you were all just like banging down my door, being like, "Tell me all about the Tunisian trade unions protesting against the
Again, Mule, really? Again?
I'm desperate to know. I'm desperate to know, Tim.
Desperate to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something that's been going on for a little while now, and it's wild how close, I guess the parallels between what's happening in Tunisia and what's happened in a lot of the other countries that we've talked about in on Red Planet in the past, like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and stuff, where so they're just like going through economic crisis, the cost of living crisis, whatever they're saying in these other, like for everyone else. And so they basically got offered a bailout loan from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Also a familiar story. We've talked about this in relation to a lot of other countries in the imperial periphery that we've talked about in the news on Red Planet. And so the people in general, a lot of the people protesting here, there's thousands and thousands of union members came out to protest this the other day. They don't want to take the loan because they say that the loan is like, these IMF loans usually have a lot of conditions. So they'll say, okay, we'll give you the loan, but in exchange, this is what you have to do. You have to, it's always austerity measures. It's always things like that, where it's like, okay, cool, well, you have to basically dictates. Yeah. So it says, we'll do this, but so that we know that you can pay this back, we need you to cut these services, we need you to scale this down, all this kind of stuff. So it's like, it affects the working class people way, way more than any of the, like the politicians and stuff that are kind of bartering these deals. And so yeah, gigantic protests over 8 different cities. And the thing is, so there's by
the way, because Sophie isn't here to say it, the IMF is evil and must be destroyed.
The IMF is evil.
Okay, now you can go on.
Yeah.
So and this is all kind of amplified, and a lot of people say that this they're in the trouble that they're in at the moment is because of their current president, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, but Kais Saied, so who he basically kind of did the right-wing populist kind of thing that we've been seeing in a lot of these places, where he got into power, immediately started doing things like consolidating power within his tight group, kind of getting rid of opponents. He stepped up to a lot of political arrests. So he's arrested a lot of his political opponents, basically anyone that criticizes him, from journalists, media figures, through to just regular citizens. And these arrests are still going, like they're constantly happening all the time. And so, one of the first things he did, it was basically like a coup. He got in and he rewrote the constitution. And he's like kind of doing all this stuff basically to become like an authoritarian kind of ruler of the country. And not in the based way either. But controversial. But so the unions are getting together and they're striking back, and they're saying that this is a violation not just of our union rights, but like everything that we stand for as I guess as union members. They have different unions have sort of different ideas of like ideology attached to them, and a lot of these the UGTT is very they are very concerned with like human rights and things like that as well. So they're saying that this is a violation of the human rights of all Tunisians, as well as just like the union rights of that you're trying to strip back. So they even had like a woman, Esther Lynch, who's Irish. who she was a representative from the European Trade Union, the Trade Union Confederation, I should say. So she came over, gave a big speech talking about, solidarity from the 45 million workers around Europe, like hands off to trade unions, free all the prisoners and stuff. And they immediately like detained her and then like ejected her from the country afterwards. And one of the things they've been charging people with, and one of their big things is like they're saying it's kind of like, I can't remember what the term they're using is, but it's basically like violence against the state. So things that, like will destabilize Tunisia, they say, which is interesting because it's like, their own crimes aren't considered, to just destabilize Tunisia, but any criticism that is, like a crime against the state, whatever. So, yeah. So, and on top of all this, like the existing economic crisis was caused just by, the same thing that's been messing with a lot of the other nations we're talking about, like the inaccessible resources that they need just to kind of get by, things like fuel, and even like just random things like sugar and stuff, like they'll just go for weeks where they just can't even get any. So yeah, it's pretty wild. Yeah, people getting kidnapped in their homes, people being arrested without even being charged and just detained, so which is like totally illegal, like I think it was, there's Monica Marks, who's a professor from university in Abu Dhabi, spoke to Al Jazeera about how illegal a lot of these arrests are, how they take place outside the rule of law. And yeah, so Saeed is playing it off as an anti-corruption crackdown, saying that, like it's the same kind of thing as what Trump was doing, where he's saying like, I'm going to drain the swamp, I'm going to get rid of like the corrupt elements within our society. But really, these are just like, peaceful, pro-democracy protesters and stuff. So it's pretty wild. It's happened pretty swift, and they say like even despite the like the anti-Saeed union kind of presence, from what I've been reading, it doesn't seem like there's a powerful enough like political opposition to challenge him at the moment. But hopefully that changes really like quickly, and like the these protests that kind of like continue to embolden people, because yeah, it looks like Tunisia's in a pretty dark place at the moment. Yeah, pretty wild. Anyway, moving on quickly, we've got one more piece here. Mule, can you tell us quickly about the Honor Oak Drag Queen Storytime events over the weekend?
Tim, I can, and this is a pretty fucking based win, chat. So you may have heard of Turning Point. There is a UK chapter, Turning Point, if you're unaware, conservative, reactionary, far-right organization. I think sort of like allegedly payrolled by the Koch brothers. What are those kind of dealios, with like Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder types. They have a chapter in the UK called Turning Point UK. Extremely cringe. I've come across them at protests here in Manchester. What they do is they're so scared to actually talk about to reveal themselves when they're so outnumbered, is they actually like go around and try and find quote people who look a bit weird to say cringe things and then use that as content. So it's that kind of thing of like where they go around to like college students and interview them, and they don't really know why they're being interviewed, and then they put it on social media and stuff. But the reason I'm mentioning that specifically is because that happened on an even larger scale down in the Honor Oak in London this weekend. So the far right were planning, Turning Point UK and the far right in general were planning on protesting a drag queen story time event down in a pub called the Honor Oak in the UK in London. I believe, let me just have a little look here. It's I'm just having a look at the source. It's not clear. St. Germans Road is where it is. Wherever that is in London, no idea. But yeah, it was hosting a magical storytelling session. It should be, if there are people who don't know about drag queen storytime events, they are extremely cute. There is nothing horrific going on there. You know, this isn't like a satanic these kind of things that like people say about, you know, reactionaries say about
Be a lot
drag
cooler if
queens.
it was.
Well, yeah, no, it seriously would, but you know, they're not fucking sacrificing kids or like showing kids sex acts and stuff like that. But these are the kind of things that the reactionary far right claim are happening at drag queen storytime events. They're not. It's where a drag queen sits down and reads a fucking story to kids. It's basically exactly the same as when a guy dressed in a Postman Pat outfit would read you a story when you were a kid, right? Do you know what I mean? It's literally just that, but with drag queens. And so, you know, the Turning Point UK were planning on going to this event. They said it's, quote, not suitable for kids. And as I've just explained, that's absurd. So a group of protesters then gathered in opposition of acts being performed in front of children from the reactionary group sort of thing. And it was like, obviously you can imagine how upsetting this would be for kids who just kind of want to be on a day out. We're not talking like old kids, we're not talking teenagers, you know, we're talking like young kids, like 5, 6, 7, 8, something like this. You know what I mean? It's a place where like parents and kids can go and just chill out on like a Sunday or a Saturday or whatever, and it's nice, right? And then you got these like fucking Nazis out here shouting things like, these are pedophiles and they're grooming children and they're transing kids and blah, blah, all this nonsense, right? So then, in response to this, we are talking hundreds of counter protesters turned up to actually support the event. And you know, the number here that's being quoted on Twitter by someone called Claire Heimer has actually said that there are maybe 500 people here opposing the far right in Honor Oak, and it's great
that's
vibes.
Amazing.
She also
That's
says
amazing.
she also says scrap that, definitely more than 500. Can't estimate to save my life. Everyone's waving inside to the kids for the drag queen story time, and things have never been more adorable. It looks like the far right were completely drowned out by the overwhelming amount of protesters there. There are some really good pictures on Twitter. I'm going to drop a link to the thread in the chat, the Twitch chat, and the YouTube chat, if anybody wants to check that out. But it's great. It's great news, you know, and this is just sort of like an example of anti-fascism triumphing. And you know, the amount of people from Turning Point there they were vastly outnumbered, chat.
Yeah.
We're talking there might have been 20 at most fascists there, right? Literally. So, you know, it's something to be hopeful of. And I'm not sort of saying this to dissuade you from, you know, joining your local Antifa chapter, writing to the CEO of Antifa. We all know that's literally all of us here at Red Planet. But yeah, you should, you know, if there's an anti-fascist organization in your community, you should consider getting in touch with them and, you know, maybe go into days like this to protect the queer community and protect kids, because that's certainly not what they're doing.
I need to like swing in and say that, by the way, if you do find any kind of like Antifa website that asks you to sign up and put in any personal identification kind of
don't do that
stuff, absolutely do not do that. Like, you know, like if you're new here or whatever, Antifa is just like you know, like a name for general anti-fascist organizing. Like you're probably more likely to find just like a Twitter account for your city that says like, hey, this is what's going to happen, we're going to go there or whatever. Yeah, definitely do not put any personal identification into anything, because there have been like just loser fascists that have set up websites like that, thinking that that's how these kind of orgs run, because like some of their own actually do, you know, really ridiculously work like that. So yeah, don't do that, because then you know, people that have put their details in have been targeted later on. So
if you do come across one of those websites, what you do is you click off of it and then you type patreon.com/red_planet and you become a patron.
She's right.
That
is what you do.
That's a much better place to enter your details.
Yes, enter your details there.
We had a great movie night showing. We had a private Goblin tier and above, I think, Goblin mode tier and above watch party on Tuesday. We watched Judas and the Black Messiah, which is something that was recommended to us by Tim here on the show. And oh yeah, like, what a fucking watch. Really, really great performances from Daniel Kaluuya. Is it Lakeith Stanfield? He was in it, and Jesse Clemens. Just really, really great performance. Like, you know, I don't know, like, I've never really seen much video footage of Fred Hampton, but like, most of the people who've seen the film have watched it and said, yeah, it's like being with Fred Hampton. Like, you know, Daniel Kaluuya really got into his role. And it really just kind of shows you, chat, how, you know, organizations could get infiltrated by feds, and you need to know what that looks like, in our opinion. You know, we've spoken on the show about what is it, infosec and opsec. Really, 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 really important if you do in any kind of org. Yeah, it's just important. Just watch it. It's a great movie. It's on Amazon Prime. Check it out. It's well worth your time. And if you want to be involved with more watch parties like that with Red Planet, then you should join our Patreon and become a Goblin tier or above. But of course, we will appreciate it if you are a Sprite nonetheless, because any
you can become a Sprite for only $2 a month, two American dollars a month. So if you want to be a part of the, you want to be a patron, which you should want to be a patron if you're watching us. What's wrong with you if you don't want to be a patron, if you're one of our audience members, listeners, watchers, audience members? There, it's a nice neutral word. You should want to become a patron. Come on.
Yeah. We've got a couple other cool things that we'll set up streams for coming soon as well. We're trying to cover like all different topics that are all kind of related to the stuff that we talk about on Red Planet. So, you know, stuff like movies like Judas and the Black Messiah, but also there's like a couple documentaries that we've been looking at. I've definitely got a handful. I haven't been able to kind of host one of these one of the watch parties yet, but there's like maybe like 2 or 3 things that are definitely on the cards that I want to plan for sometime soon. Like every week I'm finding something new, and I'm like, oh, this is something that it's like not something we, you know, need to talk about on stream, but for the private watch party, there's like a lot of stuff to go over here that's kind of like really would be really interesting for a lot of
people. You want to be part of one of these private watch parties, become a patron and specifically Goblin Motor Up. Goblin Motor Up. So $10 a month, Goblin Motor Up. You can not only join our Discord, because that's available for all tiers, but you can also become part of our join our watch parties, which we highly recommend. So
and if you're already a member and you're a Sprite, you can upgrade if you want to Goblin and then get access to that. But yeah, cool. All right, let's carry on now, because we have some guests to come in and join us.
That is correct. I am gonna introduce them for us. So it's probably painfully obvious to most people in our audience that trans people in the UK desperately need help. On the last episode of Red Planet, we spoke with Katie Montgomery about combating the media with campaigning, and Red Planet is constantly looking for people who are doing trans mutual aid, organizing, and resistance. Not just with fighting transphobic fascism every day in the media and on the streets, but legally. The legal system is not just gatekept from working class people, which trans people are overwhelmingly, but it also seems extremely hard to get support from solicitors, as the criminal justice system and legislation itself is an enormous machine that seems so completely unassailable that marginalized people feel so disempowered that they don't even bother trying to take on the establishment in this way. This is why we're proud to present the Good Law Project, and we have 2 guests to talk about the good work they're doing for trans people in Britain right now and historically. So chat, let's get a huge, if you're in a Twitch chat, if you're in the YouTube chat, let's get a huge trans rights in the chat. And let's speak to our guests from the Good Law Project. Bekah and Ellie, can you hear us okay? Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hello, yes, can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, yes. Can hear you loud and clear.
Real. I am Bekah. I am a legal officer at the Good Law Project, which means I work on the legal team and do lots of behind the scenes stuff, getting our cases together, and specifically most of our cases in the trans rights space I've had something or other to do with along the line.
Cool. And Ellie?
I'm Ellie. I'm a head of external engagement, and I speak on our behalf a lot in the media, so that's why I'm here.
Buzzing. Now, before we get into anything, we at Red Planet want to just basically start with a statement. This is something that you've already spoken about in, you've communicated to us. So this is just kind of a statement rather than, we're not really expecting you to elaborate on this, but we are pro sex work here at Red Planet. And we know that you've, been working with Right to Equality, and these are a organization that support the Nordic model. The Nordic model criminalizes sex workers such as my co-host Kira, and disproportionately trans sex workers of color, and migrant sex workers. We know GLP has stated that they're not currently taking a position on sex work, but we at Red Planet would like to encourage you to do so. And if you want to have this conversation with any of us at some point off stream or off air, we'd be more than happy to help. So yeah, if you have nothing to say on that, that's absolutely fine, understandable. But that is just to state our position on this.
Can I say something on that, actually?
Of course.
I want to say two things. First of all, I want to say thank you for saying that, because I think that's a really generous statement to make, that you're like open to talking to us about it, and it's something that you want to sort of share. So thank you very much. And the second thing is, I think this is okay for me to say because I've already said it publicly, and I'm going to speak on behalf of Bekah as well. Bekah and I are actually pro the decriminalization of sex work on a personal level,
Awesome.
aside from Good Law Project's position.
Yeah.
So I just wanted you to know that there are people in Good Law Project who understand where you're coming from as well. Even then the organization itself has chosen not to take a position, which is something that we understand and respect as its employees, but on a personal level, we do share your position on that.
Fantastic. I'm glad that we agree. Yeah, that's really cool. So with that
strongly,
out of the way,
I might add. Strongly.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, with that out of the way, then let's get either of you to talk about what you're doing at the moment related to trans healthcare delays. This is an appeal on trans healthcare delays, is that right? I don't know. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll do a bit of filling in on the case on that. So we had, I don't know if you know the history of GLP's work on the kind of trans healthcare space. Would it be helpful for me to do that?
Yeah, feel free to
intro, or...
Yeah, feel free to. Actually, I think, do you know what? It's completely remiss of us to mention that we actually spoke to a bunch of people from Good Law Project when we did our first big charity live stream last year.
That's right. Yeah.
Including me.
That's right. Yeah. So like, I think it's really important that I don't know if any of the other hosts have recordings of that they've put on their VOD channels and stuff. I've been trying to work through and upload that stuff, so I might have some of that on my VOD channel. But yeah, we spoke to Good Law Project last year during the Trans Power stream, the Red Planet stream for Trans Power. But yeah, if you want to refresh everybody's memories, Bekah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and do it quickly. And also, just as you've mentioned, the fundraiser, like, thank you so much for doing that. It raised so much money for the Defence Fund, which is like, yeah, it's amazing. Pleasure. We talk about it all the time. So yeah,
wicked.
Really, yeah. So the history of GLP's work in this space is that in sort of autumn of 2020, it was before I started working there, but they were looking into the delays that young people are facing for GID services, so healthcare services for young people. But in the middle of that case being built, obviously the Bell versus Tavistock terrible decision came through in December 2020, which as a result of which the NHS started referring young people to court in order to get a judge to rule on whether or not they could be prescribed puberty blockers. Really terrible result. So GLP funded a case in the following spring that was successful, that determined that when a doctor, parent and child all agree that puberty blockers should be prescribed, it wouldn't have to go to court. So that was a low-key but not very public success, which made a difference for some individuals, but obviously parents and children don't always agree on the right course of, whether or not puberty blockers should be prescribed. And so it didn't deal with all the problems, but it was one small chip away at the effect of the Bell versus Tavistock decision. And then we funded an intervention into the appeal of the Bell versus Tavi decision, which was also successful, and should have reversed the original impact of that terrible decision. But the NHS, or NHS England, kept in the service specification that they'd brought in after the initial decision that made the process by which the sort of process that young people had to go through before they could get the drugs that they needed much longer and more complicated. So at that point, we began a case against NHS England about that service specification in particular, but that grew and developed into an extended version of the waiting times delays that we had initially started way back before all of that kicked off. So that case expanded, and we grew it so that it covered adult services as well as young people services, and it challenged the NHS on a few grounds, one of which was that the waiting times, you know, it's a rule that covers the NHS in general, or some services within the NHS in general, not just trans healthcare, but it says that 92% of patients should be seen within 18 weeks. That is obviously not happening with trans healthcare. It's not happening across the NHS in general. The percentages are much lower than 92%. But if you look at adult services, for example, it's at 10.2%. And we know that, you know, people are waiting for 4, 5, 6, 7 years as a, you know, as a matter of course. And I think the average wait for the first appointment for young people was 152 weeks at some point last year, which is, you know, a lot more than 18.
Yeah,
anyone
it's like
can
3
see
years,
that.
right?
Yeah, exactly, which is about
And
3
that's
years.
if they get an appointment, right? Because I don't think it's not.
Right.
I wonder how common that is, that anyone even gets an appointment.
Right. Well, and with young people, there's a special difficulty, which is that obviously the window in which puberty blockers are useful is quite limited. So there's this thing where people age out of it even being a reasonable set of referrals that could be made, and age out into the adult services, and then have waiting times there as well. So we also argued that these waiting times were discriminatory because they're affecting trans people more than anyone else. In this specific cohort, so-called, of patients should be protected under the Equalities Act. So we did this case. We had some amazing, really vocal claimants who campaigned with us. Gender Intelligence was also a claimant alongside us. We thought it went quite well in court, but unfortunately, we didn't win the case. We did win on one small aspect. I mean, it's not a win in legal terms, but we were pleased that it came through, which is that under the discrimination grounds, the judge ruled that young people on waiting lists for GID services can be protected under the Equalities Act for having protected characteristic, which previously the NHS had been refusing to acknowledge, and in all of their consultations that they put out for the future young people services, they had said that the equalities impact assessments had been done on the basis that they were not protected. So that was a small win and a silver lining, and we're trying to carry that through. But at the same time, we're appealing the initial decision, and in particular, we are appealing the initial point, which is about the 92% target. Well, the NHS say it's a target duty, and we say it's a hard-edged legal duty. And that's one that, if the court agrees with us, will obviously have quite wide implications, NHS-wide as well. And we're actually putting in our submissions for that appeal tomorrow. I spent the day looking through the submissions and doing that. So that's happening right now. And we've just launched a crowdfunder as well for that specific case.
Excellent.
So that was a long summary, but that.
No, it's good. Listen, you've got 2 hours. Don't even worry about it. So, yeah, wow. Yeah, it is just sort of like, again, like that my intro was just based on a very sort of common knowledge of the legal system. Do you know what I mean? Just a very basic understanding of it, not just from understanding what my trans siblings go through, but also, you know, from a housing perspective as well. It's just this sort of like huge, unassailable, you know, the monster really a lot of the time. And so in terms of the things that didn't quite work out for you in that initial court case, like what what would you say are like the main sort of barriers that you get from like, you know, the courts and judges and stuff like that? Is it, would you say, like, are you at liberty actually to even say, is there an element, do you think, of discrimination from judges, or is there, you know, perhaps a bias or something? What's your take on that?
I was actually around for the original Ballant versus Tavi case, which it was your viewers might remember, was the case where Kira Bell went to court against the Tavistock Clinic, basically to say that people under the age of 16, is that right, Becca, couldn't consent to taking puberty blockers. And then, as Becca said, that the court ruled in Kira Bell's favour, and then that was sort of partially overturned. And I was doing some freelancing for Good Law Project at that time. And I think what I remember from that period is one of the problems is that without meaning to disrespect His Majesty's justice system, the judges are generally like older white men of a certain class background. So the level of understanding that they have of what it means to be transgender, and, you know, what a transgender person might experience in their day-to-day lives is sort of not at the level that it should be, I think. And I think that can pose a problem in cases when you have judges making decisions on things that they have never really thought about in their daily lives before. And that's not it's funny, I'm sort of tiptoeing around it when we often issue quite robust statements about judgments from Good Law Project, but yeah, I think basically that's one of the problems, and you can see that across the justice system in lots of different areas of you know, of case law. Like, I think the famous one, of course, is like rape cases, how juries often have so little understanding of what is actually at play that they can come to the wrong decision. And I think that was my experience of Bell versus Tavi, was the difficulty of having to explain something that is quite alien to this person who's making the decision. I don't know what you think about that, Becca.
Yeah, I mean, our director, Joe, got in quite a lot of trouble for some comments he made about the judge in that particular case. I don't know if anyone followed that at the time, but there's an interview with Grace Lovery about that.
Just going to put that in my Google search bar.
Probably shouldn't be bringing anyone's attention to it, to be honest, but but it's out there on the internet. But I guess, I mean, one thing that's worth saying about this particular case, so the healthcare case that was heard in November, is that the judge, we packed the courtroom. The courtroom was full of supporters, predominantly, you know, mostly trans people in the gallery, and we were all really taken by how much he seemed to understand. It was him that brought the word trans into the courtroom, because that isn't really used in the legal submissions, which relates to the next point I want to make. But he was clearly sympathetic, clearly understood the impact of what was being said to him, and was struggling more, it seems, over the kind of legal details and the implications of what a judge, I mean, judges aren't in general meant to be, and I'm not suggesting that he was guided by what the impact of what a judgment would have been in the making of his judgment, but he was very clear that if we were going to lose, it wasn't because he didn't think it mattered. And his judgment is written fairly well. I mean, maybe it means that the bar is low in terms of judges, relating to what Ellie said, but the judgment is written fairly well in terms of sort of establishment trans politics, or trans politics within the establishment sphere, is kind of good as we could have hoped for on that front, I think. And he did manage to get in this little bit about protected characteristics in young people, which he didn't need to do, basically. But in general, I would very much agree with what Ellie has said. But it also, I guess, I mean, both about the kind of like establishment class and about individual judges and how much individual judges' personal preconceptions can influence the way that they're working. And again, that's not something that we could ever accuse a particular judge of doing. But we all know how brains work.
Yep, that's right.
Stumbling over being too careful and not quite careful.
No, I totally understand, and it's completely fine.
But
like, don't worry about it. Yeah.
I think one thing that is worth saying, especially about like litigation in this space in general, is that there are different approaches you can take, and there's different kinds of cases. So Good Law Project in general really focuses on taking cases that will, or that we hope will, make a material difference in the lives of trans people. So, you know, access to healthcare. Sometimes we've had advice on single-sex spaces. We're working on a resource thing that I can't properly announce yet, but that will hopefully make a material difference to, you know, navigating life in legal terms. And the tactics taken in those kinds of cases are quite different from the kinds of cases where there's more of a culture war going on. So obviously gender criticals, transphobes often use the courts as a means of trying to change policy or legislation or restrict trans people's rights. And then there are also counter cases, and the way that judges interact with those kinds of cases is going to be different from the ways they interact with the kind of more black letter law ones. So this healthcare case, for example, we really focused on quite technical NHS law about regulations, and it had almost no trans politics in it. But we could also have taken quite a different approach and tried to bring more of the sort of cultural and political issues into the courtroom. And the way the Good Law Project works means that we chose not to do that, but you could easily have done the case quite differently. I think it wouldn't have gone so well, even though we lost. We got permission, we got through all the stages. We're now in a place where we can appeal, and it's sort of a respectable case in the terms of court, which doesn't always match up with what I think of as respectable politics by my own terms.
Right. Of course, yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting, because it's like, so does, I mean, you know, this is obviously sort of breaching out of what we're here to talk about today, but I imagine the lack of precedence, as you say, that there is in any kind of, you know, legislation for or law, like rulings and stuff about trans rights. That's probably why TERFs and transphobes, gender criticals try to come in with you know, their own legal precedent first. I imagine like that's probably their thinking. Obviously the Bell versus Tavistock thing, we know that Keira Bell was like encouraged over and over again by like a multitude of gender criticals because of her, like, you know, status as a detransitioning person. So it's like, I think that's just a really important thing to just for our listeners to understand, you know, the kind of people who are wanting trans people to suffer in this country are well aware of how the legal system operates, and they're generally trying to weigh it in their favor. Like, you know, this is why it's so pervasive. This is why TERF ideology, gender critical transphobia, is so fucked. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I just digress a little bit there, but like, so, you know, you were talking there about like the fact that there's like, in like certain cases, there's been no mention of trans people, there's been no mention of trans rights and stuff. So that's really interesting. And that's, you were talking, referencing specifically the thing that you've come on here to talk about today, which is your appeal, right? That there's no mention of trans rights in that specifically. So do you want to talk about that a bit more broadly?
Yeah, sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I mean, there's a lot of talk about trans people, but it just uses the medical terminology,
right,
which isn't obviously what we were doing at day-to-day lives. But it kind of keeps it as a technical discussion about people with certain diagnoses, rather than using the word trans. And it was the judge who interpreted that as meaning trans, which obviously it does.
Right.
But it just showed, the point I was making is it showed that he had some awareness, and he was the one who moved it away from the kind of diagnosis realm into a
it's probably less
political realm. Yeah,
it's probably less that you didn't make sense and more that I've got ADHD and I didn't understand it, so don't worry about that. But yeah, but if you do want to talk to us anyway more broadly about your current appeal, that would also be cool as well.
I'm sure that your viewers will have heard about this already, but Alice Lippman was a 20-year-old woman. She actually would have turned 21 on Friday, who came out as transgender to her family. And when she was 20, she took her own life. And obviously, there are many complicated reasons why a person takes their own life. But her family do believe that if she had been given the healthcare that she so badly needed, she would still be with us today. She had been waiting for 3 years when she at the time that she took her own life, and we have been supporting her family in the inquest because they are campaigning to have the coroner recognize the waiting times that she endured as a factor in her death. So in terms of this fundraiser that we have at the moment, this is what this appeal is all about, basically, is to stop this happening to other families, and to mean that future Alice Lippmans will be able to be seen in time and to be able to get the care that they need, because this is what's at stake, really, for people. If, like, I know it sounds like a silly maybe a odd comparison, but I remember interviewing a bunch of guys who, when I was a journalist, who had spent time in immigration detention center and also time in prison, and every single one of them said that it was worse being in an immigration detention center because you didn't know when it was going to end, whereas in prison you know when it's going to end. And that is what, whenever we've spoken to trans people about being on these waiting lists, I feel like that is always the thing that they bring up, is you just don't know how long it's going to last for.
Wow.
And that's just unbearable. I think it's incredibly cruel to put people through that. This is life-saving care that people need. And I think, like, we talk a lot about, we, by which I mean cisgender people who support trans rights, talk a lot about allyship and what that means. And I think, this is a good opportunity to do something concrete. And just, I know times are tough, so I'm not asking people to give what they can't afford, but if you can throw something into the fundraiser, it will go towards that appeal. And if we win, that will make a huge measurable difference to people's lives. So yeah, I think if I had one takeaway message from this today, that would be it.
Great. And do you is there a specific place we can find the fundraiser? I've just got onto the website and I can't find it.
We actually had a special link made up for this. So if it's not, I think Conrad had it. So either.
Oh yeah, Conrad, if you wanna chuck that in the chat for us.
If not, I can find it in a second.
Yeah. And just I guess you could put it in the Zoom chat. That would work.
Yeah. I guess cool. Maybe can I just add something to the appeal stuff? Which is, I guess, like, we want to acknowledge that it's a complicated time to be taking the NHS to court. And obviously, I mean, the specific round that we're appealing isn't going, if we win, it's not suddenly going to mean that everyone has access to the healthcare that they need immediately. I just feel like we need to be kind of transparent about that. This isn't a sudden quick fix. The NHS's defense in the first round of the case was, I mean, I'm not saying defense because I think it was right, but the way that they defended themselves successfully was by saying that they were doing all that they could, and that basically every effort that could be made by the NHS with the funding that they have. And they said it's not even a funding issue, to be honest. They said we're pouring loads of resource into this and we just don't have enough trained professionals to provide this care, and we're restructuring all of the services anyway. And now they've announced this GIDS closure, and they're going to try and make all of the services more localized, but there's been huge delays with that and no one knows what's going on. And recently you will have seen, maybe there's been this open letter from GIDS clinicians saying they have no idea what the new services are going to be. So all of that is to say there are movements happening within the NHS. For example, they've had these pilot schemes which are looking to provide more care through sexual health centers. Obviously, lots of people think, and I personally, this isn't in my professional capacity, but in my personal capacity, you know, I think primary care is a great place for for trans healthcare to be delivered through doctors, GPs, that kind of thing, but especially for adults, but and you know, expanded services for young people, but none of that is part of the case. The case is about whether or not the NHS has acted unlawfully in failing to see enough patients within the time prescribed. So even if we win, that will push that responsibility back to the NHS, and the NHS will then be either having to push that back up to government, or to shift and actually start doing more of what they should be doing and say that they're already doing within the services. So I just want to make clear, it's no quick fixes, but symbolically it's incredibly important, and also practically in the longer term, because there are pressures coming on the NHS from every direction. You know, we know that gender criticals, TERFs, whatever you want to call them, are really prominently trying to shift things within the NHS, and different trusts and different boards have fights going on within them, and different, you know, some GPs do provide bridging prescriptions and some GPs don't provide bridging prescriptions, and, you know, prescriptions, and some people say that's a question of education, but surely it's also partly a question of ideology, and what those training programs are going to look like is all up for grabs. And as they are making these shifts to the services, a win like this would be really profound, I think, for reminding the NHS that they should be developing it in the way that we all know it should be developed. Yeah, and, you know, again, just to say, we also know that NHS trans care, healthcare is not, even if it was timely, it's not all it could be, and there are still improvements to be made there. But, you know, it would be a good start, wouldn't it, if people could get seen quicker than they do now, at the very least.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Wow.
I mean, it's something that is like so vastly, just quite clearly, due to the, I mean, this is, you know, this is hyperbole from a host of a political panel. You know, so you don't have to comment on this if you don't want, but it's quite clearly, you know, the lack of funding in the NHS, coupled with what you mentioned, the inside sort of ideology of specific GPs, people in power. You know, we're talking management of the actual NHS, certain different you know, departments and what have you. You know, all this just coupled with the systemic transphobia that trans people face, you know, on a daily basis, is just like this is something that is just like so big, which is why it's so important that, you know, there's an organization like Good Law Project out there actually doing as much as they can about it, right? Because, you know, who else is, right? So yeah, this is, yeah, so that's I think that's really awesome, like the work that you're doing with you know, Alice Lippman's you know, parents and stuff. I think so incredibly important that, you know, her parents, and not just her parents, but trans people everywhere, you know, get the sort of like, you know, the news that, like, yeah, you know, it is quite clearly what we all knew all along, the lack of care that she received that led to her death. It's obvious to everyone, right? It's absolutely obvious to everybody who knows even a modicum of this stuff. Yeah, so really important stuff. Really important stuff. Chat, you know, if you're on the, oh, sorry, did you want to say something, Kira?
Oh yeah, I don't have like a question per se, but it was, I just more of like a comment as somebody who's not a lawyer. When you're describing the process, like the like bureaucracy of like getting this type of work done, having to push this responsibility onto this organization to help this to like happen, like it's already like, it seems hellish. Like it just seems like like this just seems, from my perspective, as like, again, I'm not a lawyer, I don't really work with these systems, but it seems like like, thank you so much for doing the work you're doing, because I can't even comprehend how to navigate that web, you know. It just seems like, and also the progress that I appreciate you stepping in and saying, just to be realistic, this is what we're expecting from this. It's not going to be like, hey, wait times are over. But like chiseling away this web of systems that prevents trans people from receiving like the care that they need. It's it seems like a slow trudge and a lot of wrestling with this mess. And so, again, I don't have a question, just more of like a comments, and I appreciate y'all getting into that.
I'm not a lawyer either. Yeah, and I found when I first started working at Good Law Project, I was actually really shocked at how little the law can do, especially in this country where there's no written constitution. I'm one of those people who's got weird about having a written constitution now, because I sort of realized what it's like not having one.
Wait, we've got the Magna Carta. What are you on about? That's all we need. It's fine.
Yeah, that old thing.
We have a constitution here in America, and it's going great here. So
yeah, that's true.
The
beacon to the world.
A shitty treaty that's been broken a million times.
Yeah.
It's like kind of technically legally invalid as well, but yeah, anyway.
But yeah, like so for example, when there was legislation to introduce voter ID into this country, we got a lot of requests from people saying, can you do something about that? And we looked into it and we were like, no, basically. All this is in the sort of public domain. And we said, no, we can't do that because we couldn't find a legal avenue. And actually the law is quite limited as a way of creating social change. It's kind of there to sort of uphold what already exists rather than to change things. And like judges are also like quite conservative with a small c, like they don't want to get stray too far into politics. So it's a difficult instrument to use, but I think what that shows to me is it's why spaces like this are really important, like why people like you are really important, because you're doing this job of bringing people together around your sort of shared material and political interests. And so I think it's like actually ultimately people coming together that really creates change. You know, the law is like an instrument that we can use to create change, but we also need people joining together as well. I think that's where like the real exciting stuff happens. So yeah, so like I think thank you to you as well for doing this. Is like what we do wouldn't happen without people like you doing what you do.
We've talked to people before, and I've talked to people on other streams that are like involved more with the law and also with just like members of parliament down here who have and these are people in parties that are kind of like on the left of their own party that is itself considered on the left, saying that that they find that there can be kind of a symbiotic relationship with people working within the legal frameworks and those people kind of like agitating from the outside, which I think is something that we're always trying to be mindful of here.
It's a collaborative effort, right? Like we there has to be people who are doing stuff communication wise, like what's going on here, people who are actually involved in the legal system like yous, and also activists, mutual aid groups. It's a cooperation. It's a whole thing. Like, progress doesn't just happen if it's like just the Good Law Project or just a bunch of streamers, podcasters doing stuff like saying how things need to change. So yeah, absolutely solidarity, right? Sorry,
I guess to add one thing to that as well. I think that's one thing that's quite particular about Good Law Project actually, is that it's not a law firm. Like, we're actually not lawyers. And just to be very clear, I'm not a lawyer, and everything is in my own capacity. I feel like terrible fear getting reported to the Solicitors Regulation Authority or something, even though I'm not a lawyer. But we're not lawyers, and we're campaigners, and we use the law as a tool. And that really allows us to do something like take this quite technical point about the NHS regulations, which is not interesting, really. I mean, actually, to be honest, this one is quite interesting. But a lot of the cases that we run are on quite technical points that aren't super interesting. They're important, but they're not very easily communicable to the issues that they actually do speak to on some kind of deeper level. And then what Good Law Project does is kind of interpret that and make a campaign out of it. And, some of the I don't know why I'm doing a GLP plug here, but why not? But, like a lot of the work that the organization has done in, for example, the political space takes quite a technical point about contract regulations and then notices the government hasn't been publishing those contracts, and then makes a huge news story out of the fact that the government is getting away with stuff that it shouldn't be, giving contracts to their mates, and the kind of political spin-off from that legal case is really big, and the two play into each other. And what happens in the courtroom is supposed to kind of stay separate from that, and be kind of independent for the story that builds alongside it. But I think in this trans healthcare case in particular, well, as in with all the cases really, it's really important that we've got those two things going on alongside each other, because the wider story is as important as anything that comes out of, like, if we lose this appeal, that doesn't mean that the things we were saying didn't matter, and there will still have been a campaign around it, and that time hasn't been wasted, because we were across all the newspapers with basically very sympathetic stories for 2 days. We were on the Guardian photos of the week and the this and the that, and and suddenly trans healthcare was across all the broadsheets in a really positive light, and hopefully that will happen again around the appeal. And so it's like, it's not a patch on the kind of activist mutual aid combo, but it is one block in the chain, one chain in the block.
In the blockchain. Oh, amazing. That's great. Let's make an NFT out of it. Right. Anyway, don't mind me. Just coming in with a really good joke there.
So you caught my ear one.
Kira, I think you're muted. Yeah.
The moment of realization.
You've been
How
muted.
long
Go
have
on.
I been muted?
I don't know, the whole time you were
I
saying.
was telling the chat to everyone, please laugh at Mule's joke.
You see, I wondered, there was a silence after that was normally filled with sweet Kira looking after me, validating me, and it wasn't there. And I
am trying to not upset Conrad, our producer Conrad, by typing and have like anyone hear the click clack. But anyways,
Listen.
I wanted to comment on what y'all were saying about getting those wins, at least to relate something that I was a part of recently, which is boycotting this Harry Potter Hogwarts video game. I don't know if you're familiar, but J.K. Rowling's Empire has released another product, and there is, for amongst people that trans people and allies, we were pushing to boycott this game, not because we thought it would have, it'd be nice if it had some sort of like measurable, some sort of like plummeting sales or no sales. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But the most realistic goal that we were looking to get out of it was to, as a visible show of standing in solidarity with trans people, and also to get people discussing J.K. Rowling's like immense transphobia, because there are a lot of people out there. Strangely enough, like sometimes I forget that I do like live a lot on the internet, but like off the internet, there are still people that are unaware that J.K. Rowling is like a huge transphobe. And so sure, the game sold a lot, but what ended up happening was the news had to like respond to all of this, like all of these boycotts that were occurring, all of this commentary that was happening around J.K. Rowling. And so now there's like tons of articles that are just published by like mainstream media for talking about J.K. Rowling's transphobia, or at least have, even if they're in quote unquote in defense of her, it's still like, why does anyone need to defend her? What's going on with that? So I see that as a huge win. Having that coverage. Sure, it's not, transphobia is not over. J.K. Rowling hasn't stopped being a huge transphobe, but I think of this as still a huge win in terms of visibility for trans people and for trans rights, and for, just like you said, sympathetic stories, like showing
like
the humanity of
just
people
like,
that are affected.
To like breach the discourse, to like, bring it to the table and be like, oh yeah, no, like she is a transphobe, and now it's, like, even, yeah, like, a lot of the news stories I saw were like pretty sympathetic to her, I would say, or would just say like she has controversial views or whatever like that. But just hopefully that, means people will be like, oh, controversial views, what's that? Or even in the future, if if there's 10 more stories about other things that mention the controversial views, at that point it's like it's more than just like a controversial views, right? It's like anyway.
I think it's important to mention that, like, the funny thing that I kind of predicted about this has happened, and that is that 2 weeks later there's no one else talking about this. Nobody's talking about this anymore. It's like all over. Like, people kicked up such a fuss for like a solid week, and then the news cycle regenerated.
To be clear, when you say people kicked up a fuss, you mean transphobes, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like, this is the thing. It was like
comment could be interpreted one of two ways.
Yes, I'm sure everybody listening knows me, DJ Mule, vocal transphobe. I definitely, disagree with what trans people say on the internet.
All right.
Anyway, so but it is just extremely funny, and I think it's great. I think that is a good thing for sure. And yeah, so in terms of what sort of needs to be done in order to like Tim said, breach the discourse, right? Actually, like, get through this and make solid changes. I imagine sort of like seeing the Brian Ajayi murder was probably something that did unfortunately, trans people shouldn't have to suffer before people recognize their rights and the hate that's going on, every single day towards them. But I imagine this is something that, like, has I guess, like, the Good Law Project has maybe seen. I don't know if you've ever, if anyone's come to you and said things like, "Oh, have you thought about doing something about Brian Ajayi and an inquest about something like that?" That's just something that just came to my head then as we were talking about the Hogwarts Legacy stuff. So I don't know if there's anything like that you've seen.
I think so. I can speak to this from like something I used to do, which is before I joined Good Law Project, I used to do work on public attitudes, and I did do work on people's attitudes towards like trans rights. And like also the census just came out, and actually what we are actually finding, not that you know it from reading the media in this country, but what you actually do see is people's attitudes towards trans people are liberalizing. People are, because people are starting to see more trans people in their own lives. More people are coming out as trans. There's more people in the public eye who are trans. So people are starting to become familiar with transgender people, and therefore are starting to become more sympathetic with them. And people don't understand words that we might use on this podcast. Like, they don't understand words like cisgender, for example. Most people don't really know what that means. But when you talk about trans people and trans lives in terms of like live and let live, let people just be happy and get on with their lives, and let's just accept people for who they are, and let's respect each other for who we are. You'll find that most people do get on board with that, and they do agree with it. So actually what we're seeing in the public is sort of people's opinions of transgender people are improving. And also that, and this is really important, I think, that the most negative people towards trans people and trans rights are actually men. So this idea that it's sort of women versus trans people is not real. That's something that's invented by a small, very dedicated group of bigots to provide progressive cover for what is a reactionary movement. And I think what we're seeing now is not a deterioration in sort of the way that trans people are seen by other people, by cisgender people. It's actually a reactionary backlash to the fact that this group of people are now becoming visible and are sort of creating a place for themselves in mainstream culture, that are starting to be sort of more visible in families, in workplaces. And actually, like, whenever there's that progress is made, there is always a reactionary backlash to it. And I'm not trying to belittle that, because a lot of people are hurt in those periods. Like, look at gay rights in the 80s, what happened there. Millions of people had their lives destroyed through that. So it's not that's not a small thing. But I think that is what we're seeing now. And to me, what's happened is there's been a kind of genie let out of the bottle, really. So, you know, when I was doing stuff on the Bell versus Tavi case, I spoke to loads of trans young people, and they all said the same thing. I felt a bit different. I kind of had this funny instinct that there was something different going on. And then I saw a YouTuber who was trans, and I realized that's me. That's what's been going on with me. So I just think it'll just keep happening. It'll keep gathering momentum. And I think we will, and especially because it's so generational, the divide is so generational, I do think that we will look back at what's happening at the moment. We'll look back at people like J.K. Rowling saying what she does, and we'll think, Jesus, what was wrong with us then? You know, I have no doubt that that's where we'll end. But like where we are at the moment, you know, it obviously doesn't make it any easier for the people who are enduring what they have to at the moment. And it doesn't make it any less serious. But I think it is really important to say clearly that actually most people do agree with the people on this podcast. Like most people do believe in just respecting other people living as they want to. And, you know, I think being clear that people like J.K. Rowling and the bigotry that she sort of espouses, that is an exception. And it is a viewpoint that I do think will be defeated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like I spoke about this last week with Katie Montgomery. Katie Montgomery's great, and she was talking about how the media attacks on trans people have a target audience, and you know, it's very sort of like, you know, hit or miss if they actually quote unquote recruit anyone to transphobic ideas. And maybe they will have this sort of like paper thin idea in their head that like, oh, we need to protect women's spaces for some reason. I don't really quite understand why, but you know, this is this. And I mentioned that this is like a journey that my mum's gone on, right? Like my mum is unfortunately a conservative supporter. She's voted for the Tories, she voted for Brexit. But in sort of going through the journey with her, and you know, her and my stepdad confronting me when they realized I was bisexual, because obviously I'm quote unquote one of them, one of those queers, saying like, what do you think about these trans women infiltrating the prisons and blah, 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 this, that, and the other? And it's like, you know, I'm sat there and I'm trying to explain to him and stuff like, and then like 3 years down the line, I've got a transgender girlfriend, and my mum literally said to me, I do not see her as anything other than a woman. Like, she is a woman to me. Like, I would never see her as anything other than that. And it's like, yeah, like, you know, I think when people see this discourse, it doesn't matter how reactionary they are. Sometimes, you know, it's like they if they meet a real trans person, they'll be like, yeah, this person's not really a threat to women's spaces. Do you know what I mean? This is just a person trying to live their lives, kind of thing. So yeah, you know, absolutely. And again, this isn't to sort of invalidate the experiences of trans people out there. I know there are trans people in the Twitch chat right now saying that, like, you know, I'm not as confident. And of course, like, you know, that's completely true. And you know, your experience is your experience. You know, we're just you know, a bunch of cis people here, just sort of, you know, well, I'm speaking, I don't want to speak for sort of everybody here, but like, you know, just talking about this stuff. But yeah, I think it is a really good observation to make. And again, really important to talk about how the majority of transphobes are men. Like, it is just cis men, cis het men, you know. And unfortunately, cis het men know that if they were the vocal sort of, you know, heads of this hate movement, that people would see it for what it is pretty quickly. Like, for example, Matt Walsh is pretty much like, I don't know, one of the main sort of guys, like cis het men, who's like, this is horrible, blah, blah, blah. But this is a guy who feels comfortable enough to say that he's a fascist. Like, he's not afraid to say that because he lives in the United States.
He says he's a crypto fascist, right? He like literally says that.
He says he's a theocratic fascist. Christo fascist. Yeah.
Christo fascist. Is that
he's not afraid. Yeah, he's not afraid to say this, and it's just like, well, you know, that is just sort of like why he's empowered to do that. But I think if a British guy, you know, a British cishet man sort of just like stood up and started being like the vocal head of, like, you know, anti-trans stuff, like why we like even Tommy Robinson.
Like
isn't it?
fucking Glenna.
Yeah, you know, like Glinner, like this is the thing. This is why Glinner is so vilified by literally everyone. Like he's even been kicked out of like turf spaces and gender critical spaces because they're just like
His fucking own marriage. Oh.
I know. Oh, do you know what? I actually watched sorry, this is just a sidetrack, but I actually watched a really good film last night called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. It's like a Nicolas Cage film, and Glinner's ex-wife is in that film, and it's about like how Nicolas Cage divorced you know, this woman because he was being too self-centered and everything. And I just kept thinking, like, this is a perfect casting. She knows exactly how to deal with this. She's had to walk away from Glinner. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, sorry.
Improv all her lines. Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't even get a script. She was just like, yeah, here you go.
But don't you find it crazy? Like I was like my dad's Irish, O'Hagan, you know.
Yeah.
And we used to gather around every Christmas as a family. I mean, we didn't have like great Christmases because my mum was a nurse, so she would be working a lot during Christmas. But we'd always make time to watch the Father Ted Christmas special.
Yes.
And when I joined Twitter, I remember making a joke and Graham Linehan laughing at my joke. And I remember putting on Facebook, oh my God, the writer from Father Ted thinks I'm funny.
Right.
And like now, I mean, it's just unbelievable. I just can't.
It's so extremely upsetting, and I fully get this. I think this is like a British thing. I don't know if Tim or Kira or anyone outside of the UK is going to understand this, or Ireland. Like, you know, like Father Ted is like a really fucking funny show, and in fact, like not that hateful. There's kind of like a funny episode about feminism where it's like, you know, but then again, it is more sort of talking about how the priests have this like backwards idea about women rather than the feminists are too loud and annoying and they shouldn't be listened to kind of thing. So it is like,
but also that doesn't mark it out in the 90s, right? Like if you watch Friends or Sex and the City now, you're like, oh God, that was supposed to be liberal. But like, so it's not even that markedly different from the rest of like comedy at that era.
Yeah. It's just so bizarre. It's like, this guy kind of seemed like he had like a few progressive values, and then, oh, he's just the worst. He's just the saddest, wettest boy in existence. Like he just is such a sack of shit. So yeah, I feel you on that, Ellie. Like I fully feel you on that. We used to literally watch, you know, Father Ted almost every fucking week. Me and my dad. So yeah, really.
There's
annoying.
like similar things down here where there's a couple of them like you know, like news presenters and breakfast TV hosts that have just gone totally off, like down the brainworms kind of rabbit hole or whatever like that. And it's wild thinking like, I used to see this person on TV every morning for like, you know, like a decade or more. And now they're just like, you know, like sitting on their couch live streaming to Facebook with like unbrushed hair, just screaming about, you know, trans people or whatever like that. And it's like, what the fuck happened to your brain? Like, where did it all go wrong? You know, like, it's wild how
T-shirt and I don't wear it anymore at all.
Oh,
I'm
sure.
not gonna do that.
Yeah,
it was like my favorite show.
But some of them, I am like, sure, of course you did. Like Gillian McKeith.
Oh
like,
yeah.
She's like a transphobe and an anti-vax now, and I'm like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, because she was all about that like fat phobia diet stuff, like looking at people's poo and being like, you're eating so much bad stuff, you've got to eat less stuff and what have you. And it's like, oh god, yeah, she's just got really bad opinions about everything. Like I don't even know if she's like a real doctor or something. Like I think someone called into question her like doctorate or something. I might be wrong about that, but yeah, Gillian McKeith is not a vibe whatsoever. So I'm just conscious of the fact that we've got about half an hour left before we go to chat and questions. So if
can I just break the fourth wall for a minute and say that my housemate is going to appear running past me just to grab some stuff. That's what's happening. If you
don't you worry, I appreciate that a lot. But yeah, if there's anything that like you two want to talk about in terms of, because I know that there are some extra points that you put here in the show notes about you wanted to discuss about what the fundraising actually means for in specific what you're doing at the moment, like the actual fundraiser that we've been talking about. So unless this is something that you've already covered, I just want to make sure we haven't missed anything, basically.
No, I think that point was actually, I mean, maybe we have sort of covered it in a roundabout way. It was more of a kind of analytical discussion point about what it means to be a, I mean, Good Law Project is a lot, like the supporter base of Good Law Project is a fairly liberal supporter base. It's an organization that is entirely funded by crowdfunding, and working in the trans rights space is quite unusual for organizations like Good Law Project. And what it means. So I think the kind of instigating, the instigator for putting this on was that for this appeal crowdfunder, we unusually have that we have a 50K target, which is actually, we can't take the case unless we make the 50K, and that's very clear. Whereas, yeah, and part of the reason for that is that we do find it harder to fundraise in this space. And I guess it was more of a discussion point around that, but I feel like it's actually kind of been touched on a bit by Ellie's point about actually people are more supportive than the media might make you think, and it's about creating those channels for garnering support that don't rely on mainstream media outlets. And Good Law Project is pretty good at that, and we have a huge mailing list and that kind of thing. So yeah, it was more of a kind of reflective point on the benefits and difficulties of crowdfunding, also because obviously so much of trans healthcare is crowdfunded for individuals, and that kind of has to be the like first crucial port of call, right, is individual support for individuals who need that care now, and then how this kind of more background piece fits alongside that as a fundraiser. These were just my reflections as I was writing the list down, but that's what I meant when I put it on the list.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. And thanks for clarifying that. And yeah, like I wonder if have you got any other more sort of like points that you wanted to talk about this bit here where you said strategic litigation more generally and how that interacts with the fight for trans liberation?
That's a big statement, isn't it? I think by that, I mean, that's also been touched on, I think, in actually the discussion about this particular case, you know, like what this case means alongside sort of activist work, and, you know, the kind of whether or not the fight for trans rights is happening inside the courtroom or outside of the courtroom. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about very much, and there's probably not that much that we can say because we're still waiting for a judgment on it, is you probably know that we funded the challenge to the Charity Commission for giving charity status to the LGB Alliance.
Yes,
which is a very different kind of case, and an interesting one to think about when you're thinking about strategic litigation in general. And it's not really a material gain, and there's also an element of sort of governance in it from a Good Law Project perspective about what the Charity Commission is up to and whether or not they're giving charity status to what we say is a hate group. But yeah, so that's an example of a case where the other side really wanted to bring the fight into the courtroom, and we were very keen to keep the fight out of the courtroom and, you know, to keep that as a very technical discussion. But they took the fight onto Twitter.
Yeah, I saw a bit of that. Yeah.
Really went in a way that has caused a lot of damage to a lot of people, and, you know, judgment pending. So
yeah, and this
we'll
is another
see,
thing.
But that was part of the reflection there, I think.
And this is another thing as well in this specifically, is that like I know with legal cases that what can be said on social media can actually sometimes affect a ruling, right? For example, if things are literally spoken about on social media in terms of you know, actual evidence that pertains to what a claimant might, you know, bring to the table in court, if people actually talk about that and tweet about that, that can really jeopardize a case. So is that the kind of thing that you were seeing, or was it just more sort of broadly trying to convince people who were involved to just like, you know, quit and not do it, and like, you know, harassment and stuff like that?
No, I mean, I can say this because the transcripts have been published. but actually not for all of it, but anyway, it was an open court. But every day in court for that case, the other side mentioned something that had been said on Twitter, and the judges were really, really keen to. They shut that down pretty fast. They were like, "Stop bringing us this nonsense. Whatever you're saying on Twitter is completely irrelevant to us. We're listening to the legal submissions in front of us." But it was really clear that people who were supporting the LGB Alliance in that case wanted the kind of online debate to enter into the proceedings. And in terms of what happened in the room, the judges were pretty good at trying to keep a check on that. But it was an open court and an open gallery, so the room was full. And you can imagine the kind of murmurings and mutterings that flooded to at various points.
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling also did a Twitter thread about the court transcripts afterwards as well.
Oh, did she really? I actually didn't know that she did that, and I imagine she was trying to claim that it was like, farce, like, this is just another attack on women's rights and all this kind of stuff.
I feel like it is kind of interesting how, given a lot of these like opportunities, like what you're saying about people bringing in Twitter threads and stuff like that, to the average person, a lot of the TERF stuff just comes out as really like quite unhinged, right? Like we had it down here where one of there's a really well-known transphobe down in New Zealand who has a gigantic internet following, but it's almost exclusively people in the UK, and she actually had been working, she became like, it was like the press officer for the head of our largest opposition party. And so her kind of her thing was, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to make I'm going to make women's rights or whatever a mainstream thing. Like, she's going to bring transphobia into the mainstream. There's a lot of like leaked messages where she talks about that, where she's like, okay, cool, this is going to be, we're going to have the next like the Prime Minister of New Zealand talking about this kind of stuff. And she got in, like started, and all of a sudden Judith Collins starts saying all these things, bringing up all these issues about women's rights, sex-based rights and things like that, and just completely tanked the brand. And just all the normies kind of like when confronted with a lot of these arguments, just kind of went like, so what, like what is this, like why should we like, what are you talking about, why should we care about that shit or whatever? And so like the stuff that flies on Twitter absolutely just does not fly outside of these spaces. And actually tanked the brand so badly that so the politician Judith Collins ended up being replaced by the party, and this woman, I'm not going to name her or whatever, but her and her associates that had kind of wormed up their way or whatever, when the office was, when Judith Collins lost the office, they all lost their jobs, like basically just all gone completely, just because they were too brainwormed to function within, I guess, like the realm of normal politics. So I think that's kind of like quite heartening, when it's like, you see all this like super online stuff and you think like, oh man, this person's got like thousands and thousands of followers and stuff. And it's like, you get to the real world and you're just like, yeah, no, it's just Twitter brainworms.
Yeah,
just,
they're all
just
fucking,
Facebook comments and Mumsnet and all that shit.
They're all sock accounts as well. Do you know what I mean? And what you have to remember is that like the sort of reactionary, not just sock accounts, but like the reactionary right on any kind of social media is always going to be concentrated to every single person who has an ounce of their beliefs, right? Do you know what I mean? They're just going to follow anyone. As soon as they say a dog whistle, it's like, yeah, based. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we saw them all, like flock to support Matt Walsh, and then he immediately turned around and was like,
no. I hate women, actually. They should be slaves. Right, yeah.
But I mean, it's like, obviously, like people still can do tremendous amounts of harm in online spaces and everything like that. But I just think it's kind of like, it's always great to see when someone like has something like take very seriously because they've been obsessing over it on Twitter for however knows long. Whatever,
I think
just be told like, no, this is you're being ridiculous.
I think that that's really poignant, Tim, for a couple of reasons. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, Kira, but this is something that we saw in the States, right? Like in the midterms, like a lot of Republicans were running on the anti-trans stuff, and it just didn't really work out for a lot of them. Like, you know, there was like a lot of places where they were like, you know, keeping trans people out of women's spaces is our number one priority, blah, 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 and a lot of them failed. Obviously, this does not translate to you know, protecting trans people, because we're still seeing anti-trans legislation being pushed through in these kinds of states. But like, you know, this is a policy that people are just simply not fucking interested in. Like they don't fucking care. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. I just wanted to make sure that
yeah, I think it's like it's for most people that aren't like hyper engaged with the discourse, it's like it's a fringe issue, because I mean it's an issue that affects a very small population, you know, and it's like, because of that, it should be a no-brainer that it's like, yeah, it's a small percentage of the population and we should do as much as we can to, you know, support and protect them or whatever. But yeah, I think a lot of the brainworms types have turned it into a hinge for society's success or failure or whatever. But yeah, no, I think it's yeah. Hopefully it's people start to see them more for, you know, people like J.K. Rowling and Glenna for what they are, as just yeah, deranged ideologues, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder, just on the note of anti-trans legislation in the States, if Good Law Project have sort of seen what's going on over there and you know, have any thoughts on that.
So we're not, as far as I know, maybe Ellie knows better than me, directly involved in anything that's going on in the States. We're very much a UK-based organisation, but we obviously try and keep abreast of what's going on. And we actually organised or co-organised a big symposium in September of last year, which brought together loads, like tens, maybe even 100 of activists and lawyers. And that included quite a lot of US activists as well. And yeah, it was really instructive to think actually about the differences between what's going on there. I think part of it is the sort of like federal organization, like the way that the legal system and politics interact is quite different, obviously, but also understanding, and Kira, please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, the sort of flavor of transphobia in the US is quite different, in that the sort of there's more solidarity in the kind of LGBTQ plus arena against the more evangelical right crackdown on trans rights, whereas this very particular turfy pseudo-feminist, using the name lesbian in that way, is quite a British phenomenon. And the conversations that I had with US activists at the time were about a kind of fear of feedback, and obviously like the links in with the far right in the US is now spreading more in the UK scene, and sort of like fears around cross-pollination between these two different sort of philosophies of transphobia. But for now, at least, the LGBTQ plus solidarity is more intact. And I think that also impacts legal strategy, like the kind of crackdowns on trans healthcare, and especially trans healthcare for young people in the US requires quite a different legal strategy to what's going on in the UK and in Europe more widely, because it's harder to blame a sort of fanatic evangelical right here, because it's all couched in these reasonable concern arguments, and sort of couched in the language of this pseudo-feminism as well.
It's almost like it's a baseless hatred that doesn't have any roots in reality.
Right.
A bit like that, yeah. But I guess something that links them is the moral panic over children's welfare, right? And that is just like such a jewel of a
it's always think of the children, and then there's actual pedophiles literally sexualizing and otherwise children, and that same crowd adores those people. So
I think about that
it's
a
so
lot,
wild
yeah.
how many of, like, you know, there'll be like it seems like almost every other week there's like some famous TERF getting busted for being like, you know, like a sexual predator themselves or whatever, you know, like it's fucking wild. Like,
Well, there was the woman in Scotland during the GRA reform who, like, you know, it wasn't really her vagina that she got out, but, you know, it was a fake one, and I don't know, man, like there were kids in that room and shit, and it's like, yeah, you wouldn't even fucking see a trans person come close to anything like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is just, it's so absolutely fucked that, you know, this is what she chose to do when her side was like
it really
losing.
wasn't a very adult human female set of pubic hair, I have to say.
yeah. That's the thing. They're always like, oh, a woman wouldn't do this thing that a trans person has done or whatever like that. And it's just like, I bet it'll be something super, I don't know, super ridiculous. And then they're out here like flashing people, you know, like committing sex crimes themselves. It's like, what is going on in your brain?
Yeah, and this is another thing that is like so very, you know, obvious when it comes to these TERF arguments, these gender critical arguments, like, you know, when they talk about feminism, and it's like that, you know, they didn't say a word about Roe versus Wade. And there's like another thing that happened in the news really recently, I think this week, that is associated with abortion in the States. And this is something that's just not, you know, they just don't talk about this shit because it's so it's so absurd. It's such a sort of like upper class, you know, cis het white version of feminism that it's just so far removed from anything meaningful.
I think like and there's like the common thread between the abortion stuff and the trans stuff of like bodily autonomy, right? And it's kind of like, like, you know, like it's hard to see them making the arguments in favor of reproductive rights that don't also kind of like, I guess, you know, like cancel out their views on, you know, like trans healthcare and shit like that. So a lot of them, it's just like they won't engage whatsoever with that stuff.
Well, the Kira Bell case actually did have implications for abortion rights in this country because it was based on this idea of Gillick competence.
Right.
Gillick competence says that 16-year-olds can consent to their own medical treatment if they're sort of deemed to be competent, intelligent enough, reasonable enough to know what's going on. And the result of the Kira Bell case undermined this idea of Gillick competence, and that means any treatment then for people who are under 16, including abortion, was then sort of, you know, put at risk. And it's important to note that one of people who was involved in Kira Bell's legal case was this guy called Paul Conrath, who is a solicitor and a member of the sort of evangelical Christian right in the US. And there have been strategy documents about how, like, written by those people about how like trans rights are a good Trojan horse to undermine wider LGBT rights and then also undermine women's rights. So it's, you know, it's not even theoretical. It's like, this is actually part of the plan.
Yeah.
They've stated it, right? They've stated what their goals are.
Yeah. And then you get like, it's, I mean, that's like the thing with like the Matt Walsh thing, you know, getting close to the TERFs for a minute, and they're all just like useful idiots for, you know, for like their wider agenda. It's like, I mean, they have their own like terrible agenda, but it's like this much, and then, you know, there's like these other people that have this like bigger picture, and they're just, you know, using them. But yeah,
you know, there's so many sort of awesome things that Good Law Project are doing just in general, and, you know, obviously the trans rights fight is the main thing that we've been discussing here on the show, but like, you guys do so much awesome stuff as well, right? Like in terms of sort of looking at, and these things are tangentially related to trans rights as well, right? For example, the companies at Tufton Street kind of thing, because that is actually related to LGB Alliance. Like LGB Alliance was based at Tufton Street. Apparently, I might have got that wrong. I don't know.
Malcolm Clark posted a photo of him at 55 Tufton Street, proudly stating he'd been at the offices today, earlier this week.
Right. Yeah.
I think he thought he was trolling us, but
yeah, it's just absolutely fucking wild. Yeah, and it's like, and like 55 Tufton Street is like this huge sort of like office building, or like just like a posh office building. It's somewhere that like not just Good Law Project are sort of interested in, but also Just Stop Oil, I believe, absolutely blasted the place with orange paint when they were doing the orange paint thing in London. And it's because there are a lot of businesses there that have, you know, their fingers in a lot of horrific, nasty shit. Not just transphobia and evangelical ties to the evangelical right in America, but also, you know, in actually destroying the fucking planet that we live on. So, yeah, that's a really interesting thing that I've been following from Good Law Project, personally. But I had a really good question just then, and it's completely left my head, and it was about the Tufton Street thing. It was, oh yeah, so in terms of like actually like putting the pieces together about the evangelical far right, because we've spoken about that just briefly there, about the effect that has on transphobia in America, right? But also it's been noticed, right, that this has been exported to the UK, right? This is literally like you were mentioning this Paul, what's his name, Schrofer guy, I don't even know the guy's name. Conrath, that's it. Paul Conrath guy, and he is from America, and he's like involved in trying to sort of dismantle, prevent trans rights from taking any foothold in the UK, right? And so I wanted to ask you about that, just sort of like the final question, I guess, from us, the hosts, unless my co-hosts have any other questions as well. Like, how obvious is the link to evangelical groups in the US in terms of like the hate that comes from TERF groups in the UK, if that's something that you know about anyway?
I think there has been some funding given, from what I understand from these, and I also think I'm aware that there was an internal division in the sort of gender critical movement, so I'm going to give its polite title, between those who felt that the far right could be legitimate players in the movement, as long as they agreed with the sort of their transphobic principles, and with those who felt that like allying with the far right was beyond the pale. So I think, you know, recently we saw in this weekend, you might have even mentioned it on this podcast, we saw in Honor Oak, there was drag queen story time.
Yeah.
And that was picketed by the far right. And in fact, one person was seen doing a Nazi salute. The good news is that it was counter protested by like more than 10 times the amount of people from the far right that showed up, which is great. But I think that there is certainly like at least an overlapping of ideology, clearly, otherwise the far right wouldn't sort of seamlessly be able to adopt kind of the concerns of the gender critical movement so easily. And there is, you know, to some extent, there is like an overlap in terms of the same people being involved. So like I'm not really, I have to admit, I'm actually not that online, so like I'm not based.
Based.
So I don't even know what that means. Extremely based. Stay away.
It means good. It means this is a good thing. You should continue to do it. Yeah.
Good. Yes. Very based.
I love how you just very based.
And yeah, but I think there's this person called, maybe I'm gonna get, okay, I might be wrong about this, so please don't sue me if I'm wrong, but Posey Parker, I think, was a sort of person that there was this huge argument about, because that person is a member of the far right. And then so I think, you know, there is at least an overlap of ideology, but I think we can say that there is an overlap of actual people. And, you know, what you were saying earlier about brainworms, I think the best way that I could describe what's happened is it's a conspiracy theory, and people have become radicalized into it. You know, there's like what this movement actually believes at its core is just simply not true. There's no evidence for it. I mean, God, you'd think that there'd be more transgender people in public life if there was such a thing as an ultra successful transgender lobby.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just clearly not true. And it just feels to me like it's a conspiracy theory that people have become radicalized into, that is reactionary in nature, and that has meant that people are now no longer they're no longer able to apply like consistency or rationality to anything that relates to it, because that's not how being radicalized into a conspiracy theory works.
I think you're spot on. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it is good to talk about it in the realm of conspiracy theories, because it does overlap so much with things like anti-Semitism, you know, fear of migrants, you know, fear of black people, you know, just straight up racism. It's just, yeah, you know, very, very, very obvious. And I think it's really good that you, who are so offline, so based, so offline, can see that, because it's glaringly obvious to most people who sort of, you know, spend I guess an embarrassing amount of time online, such as myself. But yeah, so I think, yeah, really, really good answers so far, and insights from you. Thanks both of you for coming on and talking to us. But let's I think maybe we're getting like a couple more questions come through, so I don't know if we should start questions.
We should start with the questions.
Yeah, okay, let's do it.
We rushed chat with the questions. Clearly we didn't give them enough time. They're still submitting them. So we like to bully our community here, in case you know what we're doing. So
I will ask the first question. The first question is in reference to the appointments for trans healthcare. The discussion that we had like right at the start when you first came on. Mel's Ghost asks, what is the official excuse for these waiting times? I mean, it's obvious it's transphobic discrimination is the reason, but what do the officials say is the reason?
Yeah, good question. So yes, and also very well caveated. We know what the real reason is, but what NHS England said in their defence is, I mean, yeah, again, I did sort of allude to this earlier. They basically have just said that they're doing what they can, and they really focus on a lack of professionals who are trained, who can give the medical care required, which is strange when we know how many private practitioners there are providing this care for lots and lots of money. And also we know how limited in number the services are, and we know all the bureaucratic issues at the services, and we also know a lot about clinical gatekeeping and the general how best to tactically describe it, the way in which transness is diagnosed and care is meted out by professionals, right? So we know all of that, but they're so, this is me speaking. So I didn't do the disclaimer that I wanted to do at the beginning, so I'm doing it on every answer. So this is me speaking, not Good Law Project speaking. But we know that they're so fixed in their understanding about how this care has to be provided that they provide as their excuse and defense reasons that the way in which they think about it cannot be rolled out more than it already is, and that they're doing everything they can to roll it out as fast as they can and to as many people as they can. Whereas most people who know anything about it from a different perspective know that actually there are loads of things they could be doing that require them to change the way that they think about the structures of how this care is provided and the way in which the NHS provides it through the different trusts and through primary care and that kind of thing, that would mean that those defences fell down. But yeah, they've been very explicit that it's not funding, it's all about person power, and yeah, that's it. That's all they've said over and over. And then because they've now made these changes, there's the CAS review coming through. So, you know, they have now made this, announced this change, this closure of the good service, and they say they're going to make all these changes. They also say they're going to bring out more pilots, like the sexual health. I think there's 3 pilots currently ongoing, and they say they're going to do more of that. But yeah, that's it. You can read all of their witness statements on our website, so you can see exactly what they've said in their own words. Go to the case page and you can see the defense witness. I think we've got the defense witness statements up there as well. Pretty sure. And if not, they'll be summarized in our submissions. So sometimes we publish only our side of the submissions, and sometimes we publish also the other sides. But if you can't find the other side, so the NHS England's witness statements, then you'll see what we've said in response to them in our skeleton argument. And as the appeal goes on, we'll be bringing more of that through as well. So and read our blogs, that also summarizes it, but it's basically what I've already said.
Cool.
Actually, also there's a really good counter to that. Sorry, on the we've got some of our witness statements are up there. Dr. Michael Toes has written a brilliant witness statement that we submitted as part of our submissions. That is the kind of medical counter, or the kind of the counter in that frame. It counters all of their arguments, and it's really worth a read. And it's a really useful resource actually for sharing with people who have these kind of reasonable concern arguments around healthcare provision. And it's just fabulous, and it's got all the stats. So yeah, it's a really useful resource.
Brilliant. I think that's a great answer. Thank you very much. Tim, do you want to read the next one?
All right, cool, sweet. So from, where is it? Frongy Chair. I've got a question. Does the GLP have plans to get involved with the Scottish GRA reform and Westminster blocking it?
I don't know is the answer to that. If you look at our executive director, Joe Morm, if you look at his Twitter, he actually did write a really extensive response to that. And he was in a lot of even in the international press. I think he was in the Washington Post, I think, and in commenting on it. But we are opening an office in Scotland, but we have not yet recruited the staff, but we're sort of in the process of doing that now. But I think basically what's happening is we will decide what legal work we're going to do once those people are in place. So at the moment, I don't know is the answer to that.
Yeah. So once the Scottish office opens up, you'll be kind of figuring out what's possible then, I guess. Right. Well, what's the next one? Kira, do you want to take a look in there?
This is from This Dungeon Sub-Boss. What do you do when the law explicitly says your basic healthcare is illegal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I guess that's what I was sort of trying to indicate by saying, even if we win this case, which I hope that we will, and even if it did have a magic switch, there's still some aspects of the healthcare that would then be provided that isn't enough. And I guess we all know what people do now in terms of a practical answer to the question. There are lots of options for how people access healthcare themselves. It tends to be for money, and it tends not to be regulated so well. I mean, I don't know if you're actually asking for practical tips. GenderKit is a great website.
Yeah.
You know? I can point you towards good resources, but you probably have them yourself. But yeah, I mean, in some senses, it's a rhetorical question, isn't it? This is the situation we're in, and it's shit.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say we have actually done some reporting streams before on the phenomenon of DIY HRT kind of practices, what people do in various parts of the world where they have their healthcare isn't accessible to them, and the ways that they get around that. You know, as a stream, we can't recommend you do anything in particular, and I'm sure the Good Law Project can't encourage you to do that either. But if you look into that stream, you maybe you might find it interesting how different people in different parts of the world have managed to provide for themselves where the system was lacking. Next one, we've got one here from Agent Hedgepiggle saying, when we have a law system that is so immovable and failing so many people, the work you're doing is a part of the hard work that is needed to make change. My question is whether you think that the system can be corrected to something that works for us all. How do you think good law should work or look?
That is a massive question.
It's huge, right? Yeah.
I feel
how will you structure society? Go.
I'll do our boss a solid and say Joe actually does have a book that sort of talks about this coming out in April. There, hopefully he'll be happy that I've plugged it.
Cool.
How does it? Well, I suppose that's like a question that depends on who you are and what you believe in, right? I mean, someone like Keir Starmer would say you have strong institutions and you reform them to make sure that people are treated equally, but then you might have someone else like, Trotsky would have said, will you overthrow the state and you rebuild sort of like from the ground up based on what the working class needs? So the answer to that is kind of
state of perpetual revolution, right?
Yeah. Well, the answer to that is like really who you like, based on who you are. How do we make the law equal? Well, the law is the kind of skeleton of society. So it's made by us and it's supposed to reflect our values, and it's supposed to uphold society as we want it. So to change the entire law in order to make it more equal, I think would involve changing the entire of society. And the question of how you do that is really up for grabs, and it sort of varies from person to person depending on your beliefs. Sorry, that's like probably not a very helpful answer, because
I
it's
mean,
quite
I think
vague.
it's pretty good. Like, I think what you've summed up is that the law, like, it's not just that we can change a couple laws or whatever. It's tied into, it literally, it is like the law dictates the way society is structured and back and forth, either way. Like, so we can't, it's like, it's a much bigger problem than just like a law here or there or whatever. It's a societal thing. It's how everything is structured, which I think is, it speaks to, like, regardless of what your, ideology is, if you, think you're a democratic socialist, a communist, an anarchist, or anything like that, I think that answer is pretty in line with, like what I think a lot of people would think,
I'm really impressed because I did a whole critical legal theory masters, and like the two of you have just summed the whole thing up so much better than what I was about to try and like dredge my way through.
Well, I dropped out at 15.
All the better for it, evidently. But I guess the one thing I wanted to add to it, it's not so much the what we're aiming for question, and it maybe reflects some of what we've already talked about different tactics to get there. But there's a really nice Murray Matsuda quote about how sometimes you have to be in the courtroom proclaiming loudly from behind the stands to the judge, and sometimes you have to be outside the courtroom banging your fists on the door. And it's about, the legal system as it is clearly not working for most of us. And it is very normative and very prescriptive and works with a lot of binaries, and but it also can be used as a tool for transformative change, and it really depends whose hands it's in. And sometimes you're going to have to be inside, and sometimes you're going to be outside, saying the whole thing needs to be torn down. And I mean, there's one interpretation of that quote that really leads you towards reformism, but there's also, I think it's intended as quite a radical position that can like allow us to still act, but also have a vision for a very, very different world that we're working towards.
Right. Interesting. Well, what's the next one we got there, Mule?
This is from Unwanted Orchid. Question: is GLP aware that GICs aren't providing orchiectomy to patients, even though they're supposed to? I was told that they don't have anyone to provide the surgery in the whole country.
I'm sorry, I need someone to tell me what orchiectomy is.
It's when you get rid of the balls, the testicles.
Oh,
Right, yes, okay,
yeah.
I thought so. I just needed
Yeah.
to double check before I launched in.
No worries.
It's still on pause. I believe, from what I understand, it was being provided and then they stopped it, and a lot of people's surgery was stopped halfway through. I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know. I think actually I'm just going to stop and trying to answer this question. I don't know the answer.
Fair enough. And I think that's pretty, yeah, I think that's the right thing to do. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't answer it. So we'll move on to the next one. Kira, do you want to read this?
Yes. Yeah. So from Fan Dangley, is there a resource to help see which businesses / organizations should be avoided due to being problematic or run by nasties? Okay. Yeah.
Like a BDS, but for turfs, maybe.
Yeah, I guess so. I suppose.
Yeah, is there any indication what kind of organizations, like support organizations or like political organizations? Or
I think they're talking about like anyone who, you know, where they have people in the higher echelons of the framework of the organization or the business that have gender critical views or transphobic views. I imagine that that's what they're referring to. I don't know.
Yeah, well,
if,
you see, like some of these, you get like some companies or like even smaller businesses that you know, like donate a lot of money to, you know, various political causes and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of any organization like that down here that kind of keeps track of everything. But is there anything in the UK that does anything like that?
Not that I know of.
No. Oh.
Sorry.
We had Katie Montgomery on last week, who we were trying to sort of start doing this.
Oh, yeah.
We kind of were sort of like batting around, you know, what do we do for trans liberation? Like, you know, what activism can we do? And one of the things that Katie brought up was about Sleeping Giants in the US and also Stop Funding Hate in the UK. These are two organizations that basically look at advertisers that advertise on hateful you know, pieces of media. Like, for example, the Times runs transphobic pieces, the Times runs anti-migrant pieces, and so it would make sense to like support Stop Funding Hate and maybe you know, reach out to them, or potentially do your own version of Stop Funding Hate where you say like, oh, this particular organization, you know, is transphobic. It's fundamentally, systemically transphobic, institutionally, and you know, we can't fund it and we need to be aware of it, kind of thing. So that is something that we actually discussed on Red Planet last
like
week.
something,
so yeah,
that you could do, like that, well, that we could do, or that anyone could do, is kind of like a very, I guess, like a low stakes kind of activism that is very accessible to a lot of people, you know.
extremely
it's like,
accessible.
you know, just hounding advertisers, and seems simple, but yeah, there's a lot of people that have had a lot of success with that. So yeah, it's definitely something we're considering for you know, in the future.
Hell
But
yeah.
yeah, so what we got another one here from R Maseri asking, yeah, how did you get involved in the Good Law Project?
I actually got involved because of the trans work. I mean, I obviously, like, there's a lot of work that we do that I'm really excited about. Like, we're one thing that we're doing at the moment that I'm really excited about is we're using like a really old piece of common law to take the government to court over the fact that water companies keep dumping shit in our rivers, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm like really excited about that. I love all of our procurement cases. That, like, it's really exciting whenever a new one of those drops, and we get to expose, like, the one that we did that story a couple of weeks ago about Greg Hands and his he just after he became the chairman of the Tory party, and his involvement with that company called Lux Lifestyle, that was quite dodgy, you know. So actually being able to sort of expose wrongdoings of senior members of government is also really cool. But because of the sort of the way things are politically at the moment, I feel like you've really got to be there's only 3 areas I think like that I'm interested in working in. One is climate, for obvious reasons. And we are doing you know, a lot of climate cases, well, a lot of climate work we have done, and we will continue to do that. One is refugee rights and migrant rights, because of the rise of the far right that we're seeing at the moment. And then the other is LGBT rights, because I think that I've never seen such a reactionary backlash to LGBT rights in my, well, not in my lifetime, because I was born under Thatcher, but you know, since I can remember, as someone who was politically interested. So when the opportunities came up to work for Good Law Project, I took it because, you know, it's a brave decision. It shouldn't be a brave decision to stand up for trans rights as an organization, as a political organization, but it seems to be in this country, and I felt like I want a piece of that. And the other thing that made me think I want to work for Good Law Project is when Joe, our boss, took on criticizing Nick Cohen, the journalist, for sexually harassing colleagues. And I guess I just thought that's the kind of organization that I want to work for, an organization that isn't afraid to do things that might make it unpopular, but because they're the right things to do. So that's how I ended up working there. And obviously we have sometimes, you know, disagreements internally, like the aforementioned disagreement over, you know, I'm sure that if Bekah or I were running Good Law Project, it would have a position on sex work. But at the same time, you know, I am glad to be working somewhere where I can say that publicly and feel that will be acceptable for me to say it within the organization.
Awesome. And what about you, Bekah?
Yeah, I mean, all that, I guess. It was the trans rights stuff that was my main draw. I've done quite a lot of activism over the last 10 years, and was very committed to working as a carpenter and doing activism on the side, and not making my living out of the politics I was involved in, but that all fell down for various reasons. And yeah, Good Law Project stance on trans rights was a real draw for me, and you know, they're continuing to pull through with that, so that's good. And yeah, solidarity with sex workers everywhere and always.
Hell yeah, we love to hear it. So I believe
where I get to homework now, right?
No, I think. Oh no, it is. No, there's a final question. There's a final question.
My apologies.
That's okay. It sounded like the final question, because that was a very final question, wasn't it? It was like,
yeah, I had a very all right.
Why did you start this? Like, what's going on? But no, the final question is from Narlon Starfire. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he says,
I call him Nair.
Narlon Starfire says, do the other parts of the NHS, in brackets the NHS in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, have the same failings at delivering trans healthcare?
Yes, is the short answer. Yeah, I think waiting times in Northern Ireland are particularly horrific. The Scottish system is slightly different, but I think there are still significant failings. But the reason that NHS England is the only defendant in the case is because they are just run separately, and you need quite specific claimants with a specific defendant in order to bring the case. And healthcare just is devolved. But obviously, because of the campaign element and wing of taking the case as Good Law Project, we hope that any implications will also ricochet sort of through the devolved nations. But yeah, unfortunately, it is only NHS England that we're taking to court. But yeah, it's everywhere. It's institutional.
I think the important thing for our audience to understand about the other parts of the United Kingdom is that it's the only sort of remnant of Britain's colonial past that still exists. Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, they're all basically places that were colonized by England. Do you know what I mean? It's you know, they're not gonna, if it's bad in fucking England, it's gonna be worse in these places, right? That's
I'm Welsh, so you're really speaking my language right now.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah,
It's St. David's Day on Wednesday as well, so this could not be better timing.
Hell yeah. You know, look, you know, I'm basically English, but you know, I've got Irish heritage, and I just think it's really important to remember that this is like something that people really overlook, right? So yeah, enough solidarity with our colonized siblings in and around the UK. But yeah, so absolutely fantastic questions, chat, and I think that someone else in the chat, Blumhouse, has just talked to us about the orchidectomy thing, so I'll read this just in case anyone's interested. She says, the orchidectomy thing, all gender affirming surgeons are capable. It's possible to take the case to your local CCG, but you need examples of previous patients who've received the surgery as a precedence, preferably in your area. I was the first patient in the UK who got the orchidectomy. There was one previous, she had testicular cancer. It took me 3 solid years of battling to access the procedure. So there you go. There's someone who's been on the front lines of it when it was actually, do you know what I mean, sort of in progress kind of thing.
Can I ask, if you have half a minute, whoever wrote that, could you send it to legal@goodlawproject.org, just so we can have that information? And because we get so many emails, and we don't give advice by email, we're not a legal organization, we can't give individual legal advice, but it's just really good for us to know as absolutely most as we can about everything that we're working on.
Thank you so much for answering the questions, and thank you so much for being our guest. Now, our chatters, I don't know how familiar you are with Red Planet, but our chatters are little nerds, dorks, bods, swats. You know, they love homework. They love it when we give them homework and things to do. You know, they absolutely, you know, they really do kick up a fuss if we don't give them anything to do. So I wonder if there's anything that you two would like to suggest to the chat that they could do for homework this week that is either around the Good Law Project or trans liberation in general.
I've got an answer, which is because I've just forgotten one of the points that I meant to say, but I think I can work out a way to twist it into a piece of homework.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Which is that one of the cases that we never managed to get off the ground at GLP was one that would challenge local ICBs who were not giving, who had discriminatory policies for funding for fertility preservation. And the reason that we didn't get the case off the ground is because every ICB, used to be CCGs, has a different policy, and it has to be very, very fact specific in order to make a legal challenge. And we were really struggling to find claimant. So I think the homework I'm giving is loads of people who we spoke to didn't even know that this was an issue and didn't know that they might be eligible for fertility preservation funding. Doesn't mean that all trans people are eligible, because it does depend on the specific policy. And if they have a legal non-discriminatory policy, then it may be that you're still not eligible. However, let people who might want funding for fertility preservation on the NHS know that they can ask for the policy of their local CCG or ICB, look at it. If they think it's the really bad one, they can send it our way. I'm not promising we can take a case, we probably can't, but it would be useful to have a record of that. And it's worth challenging them if you think it is. And if your doctor isn't referring you for it, then you can push them on that as well. So that's the homework, is to just spread the word, because I think it's one particular aspect of trans healthcare that actually a lot of people don't seem to know might be a possibility. And the other homework is, please share our fundraiser for the appeal. It's really important that we can take it onto the next stage. And I know that there's a lot of fundraisers out there at the moment, but yeah, this one would be, we really need to get to 50K, and yeah, you can't donate yourself, then please just spread the word.
Cool. I think that's absolutely awesome.
Ellie might have more, I don't know. Or is that putting you on the spot?
No, I actually kind of did have one, which is just today I watched this amazing documentary called Open Door. Wait, let me make sure I get this right. It's called Open Door, Transsex Liberation Group. And it is a documentary that was made in 1973 by trans women. And it's basically a discussion between 4 trans women about their lives So it's a documentary about being a trans woman in Britain in the 70s,
Wow.
made by trans women. It was made and it was broadcast on the BBC. I don't know whether this is like I guess a content warning would be that because it was made in the 70s, the understanding of like the way that being transgender was spoken about would now seem very dated. It's often related to your sort of surgical transition. That's how they tend to talk about it. But it's nevertheless like really amazing and a really unique piece of television, and it's uploaded onto the BBC archive to see 4 trans women in the 70s in their own words, like making the show that they wanted to make, talking about their lives. It's an incredible watch. I really recommend it. But also please donate to our crowdfunder.
Awesome, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people in the chat will love to check that out. Oh yeah, Blumhouse saying that they love that doc. Cool. So yeah, thanks so much for coming down. Thanks for thanks for talking to us, and thanks for educating us on what you who you are and what you do and stuff.
And thank you for doing what you're doing.
Yeah,
Like, thank you so much.
Work. Yeah, awesome.
Right back at all of you, and thanks for having us. Like,
yeah,
it's always such an honor. I'm a really big fan as well, you know, so it's always a real honor to come on this show. Ever since I watched Sophie eat those bugs on the crowdfunder, I've been like on the funding weekend. I've been hooked. So no, it's really nice to come. So thanks a lot for having us.
Well, yeah, we'll pass on the message to Soph. I'm sure we're stoked. Cool. All right. Thanks for having both of you, and yeah, we'll see you again sometime in the future, I hope.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
And we are now 3 of us again. And so what a fantastic episode. That was so good, wasn't it? Do you know what would be a really cool thing to do if you wanted to see more of those episodes as good as that, maybe even better? You could go to patreon.com/red_planet. Oh my God, there it is. Look at that. And there are different.
So beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And in fact, do you know what? Let's take a little minute just to kind of look at where we're at, because we have a goal of £921 per month, which is, I believe, $1,000 a month. And we are there. You can see we have 97 patrons at the minute. That's absolutely incredible. I've seen the patrons coming in the Discord this week. It's been absolutely awesome. We're at $809 so far. So we only need $200 more, or if you're in Britain, in it, about about £250. Roughly thereabouts to actually get to I don't know what it is in New Zealand.
I think it's like
gonna be like a million
bucks.
a million bucks.
I think it's like $300 or $400 or something like
Every
that.
natural disaster goes up like a
the Patreon thing is all weird for New Zealand dollars. It doesn't line up right with what the little graphs is.
Sure.
But yeah. Oh, but we are at the moment, our current per month is extremely based in New Zealand dollars. We're bringing in $1,312. Very auspicious number. Very auspicious number.
That is extremely based. I love 1,312. It's my favorite number.
Yeah.
See that in the chat a bit more. I don't know, in the Twitch chat and the YouTube chat. That's a nice number to just post, I think. Yeah.
Cool.
It's really awesome that there are so many of you, but we need more, and I'll tell you why. And that's because we have so many awesome things planned this year. Me and Sophie particularly are sort of like making plans for when this happens, when we actually reach the $1,000 goal, because the $1,000 goal is there because that means we'll be able to hire an editor, which means that we could do all sorts of awesome shit. And that doesn't necessarily just mean funny little clips that you can watch of the live streams, but it also means that we will be able to go out there and do some potentially documentary content. So for example, some of the guests that we've had on in the past, like the Gaskell Garden Project, we could even go to Brittany, Jay Jordan and Isa Flameau from the Laboratory of Insurrection of Imagination have invited us to their commune. So there is so many different options that we've got available. Tim could go and interview some people, like, and potentially we could afford to give him some money for, you know,
Your
a
forehead, you really
videographer.
should be a patron right now.
Yeah,
Your forehead.
literally, if you're a Tim head,
Real
forehead,
foreheads. Yeah, real foreheads.
Real foreheads should be all patrons.
Yeah.
that's true. But those are the potentials. But let's talk about the benefits. And the first tier that we've got is Sprite mode. And I'll tell you all about that right now. You can get started with your support for Red Planet by becoming a Sprite. It's only £2 a month, but the benefits include the sacred and forbidden knowledge that you're helping the Red Planet team, early access to VODs, and access to the Red Planet Discord. Kara, what's the next tier?
Oh, the next tier is Goblin mode. That's the tier you need to subscribe at, chat, if you want to be part of our
Private hangouts and
private
watch parties.
hangouts.
The little
Yeah.
watch parties,
Intimate
yeah.
private hangouts. Everyone, this is for $10 a month, by the way. Everyone loves a goblin. We all get a little goblin mode from time to time. Complete your gobology by going goblin mode with everything from Sprite mode, a pack of cool Red Planet stickers for you to stick in legal places and only in places like that, and exclusive access to the Red Planet Discord hangouts. Like we said, the intimate private hangouts.
Private hangouts.
I want to do one sometime soon. I've got, like I was saying earlier, there's a couple of docos that I really want to do. There's one with the author Donna Haraway called Storytelling for Earthly Survival. That'll be really cool. And there's also another one, Kanesatake, 270 Years of Resistance, about a indigenous group from Quebec. I think they're Mohawk. And and about the various ways they've resisted the Canadian state for 270 years. So I think one of those is going to be on the agenda real soon. So if either one of those sound good to you, then
I am so down to get
mode.
up early and watch those with you, Tim. 100%.
Yeah, it's kind of got to either be early or late, but I'll find a way. Unless I have like a day off randomly somewhere, I can maybe do one during normal hours.
So if you want to be part of that, chat, you subscribe at Goblin mode. But Tim, what if someone wants to support us even more and get more stuff?
Cool. Well, for $20 US a month or 38 New Zealand dollars, you can go beast mode, which for that, it's all the stuff from the previous tiers. So you get like the Discord access, and for the hangout streams and stuff, you get stickers. And but also pin badges is something that we're working on. Little pin badges you can pin to your leather jacket when you go out to the leather clubs, anything like that. But yeah, so that's a good one. But there's an even greater tier that I think I'm gonna need to hear from Mule about.
Thank you, Tim. That's right. It's, oh my God, the most sicko tier that you could ever have. And that's why we call this sicko mode. And that is 94 British English pounds, quids, or $100 a month. I don't know what it is in New Zealand dollars, probably something like $1,000. If you support us with this much, you can only really reasonably offer you all the stuff from the lower tiers, plus a very special thank you message at the end of every stream, like this one that's going to happen right now. Thank you so much, Goblin Games NZ and JBP, for being our sickos. Really appreciate it.
You can join them. You can join that club.
You could join that club. You could join that club, the Sicko Club. Imagine if we were calling out your name like that in the chat. So that is the end of the show. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's been really, really good. Conrad, I would like to ask if it would be cool if you could raid Queen Pib. I'll spell it in the chat for you. Queen Pib's an absolutely incredible streamer. She is a drag queen. She's playing Yakuza Dead Souls. I think we've raided her before. You will enjoy the stream. But before we do that, Kira, where are we finding you?
You could find me on my link tree. It has all my sites. Everything is Kira Chats on Twitter, on YouTube, which I don't really upload that much to YouTube, but I need to get back on it. But Twitter, Twitch, and my Wink socials, Wink, wink. You can find in my link tree. It's someone post my link. Yeah. So yeah, it's in the chat. Linktr.ee, because they would put the dot in a weird place, /Kira chats. And also my Discord, discord.gg/Kira chats. We hang out there a lot. I hang out there too much, honestly. It's like, because I took Twitter off my phone. Now I'm like, I put all of that obsessive, like very online energy onto my Discord.
I think that's
so
good.
Just go
I think that's better
there.
than Twitter, you know?
It is better, but it's way better. But yeah, I'm always there. So discord.gg/Kira chats. All this stuff is in my link tree. But Tim, let's say I'm a huge forehead, because I am. I'm a major Tim head. Where can I find you?
You can find me on Twitch or YouTube. I'm under Conquest of Dread. I'm gonna do a gaming stream sometime, probably in the next couple nights, because some awesome company just sent me a review code for their brand new game that they want me to play and check out and give them some feedback on, called Cop Killer 22XX. So yeah,
wow,
I wonder how
You're
they
gonna play that in criticism, right?
Yes. Well, so I'm gonna play this game. It's like an old, like, kind of arcade pixel kind of side-scrolling thing. And it has a little interesting little write-up about it, set in like a future where it's like corporations kind of control everything, which is like, like, I mean, that's like the current day, but you know. So it's something about like busting people out of jail and killing cops. So I'm like, hell yeah, I love to do that in video games.
And you know, if you wanted to hear about Tim doing that earlier, you could have found that out in the Discord, because he posted that yesterday.
Yeah, I do. We do have
a
a channel in our Red Planet Discord where we talk about games and stuff. It's probably the channel that I'm the most active in.
He is.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though I haven't really been playing too much games or streaming lately, been a bit too busy with the whole like climate catastrophe thing. But yeah, I'll be streaming that sometime in the next couple of days, I think. So if you want to find out when I'm going to do that, follow me over on Twitter at DreadConquest, and that's where I post about, just shit posting and stuff about streaming and stuff. Yeah, but Mule, where can I find Mule?
Well, you can find me at linktr.ee, DJMUEL. That's how you spell my name. I've got some really, really cool Patreon posts to do. I just kind of finished filming for my next video, so be on the lookout for that. It's going to be coming in possibly like a week or two. Very, very excited to show everybody it. I think people are going to enjoy it. But if you want some really, really awesome behind the scenes content, then, become a patron, because I'm not even bigging myself up here. I didn't expect him to be this good, but my good friend, Dan, he is basically like a really good videographer. He's been coming with me. I paid him to like film the whole thing. And he also, like, as he's filming, does behind the scenes content as well. So he's done a lot of pictures, he's done a lot of videos. For example, there's a video of me flying a drone, which is pretty funny. I don't really know what I'm doing. I've never done it before, and you can check that out on my Patreon. But in the meantime, you can find me playing games on twitch.tv/DJ Mule. And also, huge shout out to our wonderful sister, Sophie from Mars. She's not here today, but you can check her out at patreon.com/Sophie from Mars, twitch.tv/Sophie _FRM_Mars, and YouTube Sophie from Mars. The most important one is the Patreon. Please go and support our Sophie on Patreon. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for hanging out. Solidarity, love, goodbye. See you all later.
Bye, my sweets.
Bye.
Bye, your audience.
See you all later.
Bye.